Chapter 62. Yuren did not pick up the string of stone pearls, even though he knew they were heavenly tome monoliths. Su Yurong placed her hopes on him. It must be because Chen Chongqing often mentioned her. But he also had no way of entering the garden of Zhou. However, he knew that Chen Chongqing wouldn't want to see him appear. If he really did encounter a danger that he could not resolve, Chen Chongqing would naturally emerge from the garden of Zhou. The white grass path was straight and long. Walking on it, one would experience the changes of the 4 seasons in a very short period of time. It didn't take long for Chen Chongqing to pass through spring, summer, autumn, and winter, before finally crashing into the violent snowstorm. He kept running towards the other side of the blizzard, his face paler than the snow. The temple in the depths of the snowstorm had already become a tiny black dot and was burning. On the white grass path, there was a temple 10 li away, a temple 100 li away, and a temple 1,000 li away. Chen Chongqing and Shang Xingzhou had met 3 times at these 3 temples. Regardless of whether he entered the temple to hide or not, he would still be discovered. Perhaps it was because the place where they, master and disciple, spent the most time together was that old temple in Xining village. The 3 short but dangerous encounters had caused Chen Chongqing's injuries to worsen. Some of the less intelligent but more ambitious demonic beasts couldn't help but show themselves in an attempt to help Chen Chongqing. However, they were chopped into pieces by Shang Xingzhou's Dao sword. The sea of grass in those areas was completely dyed red by the blood of the beast. The scene was very bloody. Even though the situation was so dangerous, Chen Chongqing still had no intention of leaving the garden of Zhou. Leaving on his own and trapping Shang Xingzhou in the garden of Zhou was not an option, because that was not a battle. Moreover, when he opened the spatial passage, it was very likely that the other party would seize the opportunity. For this reason, he had not even attempted to use the laws of the garden of Zhou to teleport. More importantly, the preparations he had made to defeat Shang Xingzhou were all in the garden of Zhou. In the past few days of quiet contemplation in the Li Palace, he had made many preparations. However, those methods were all based on the fact that he could draw his sword. As soon as he entered the garden of Zhou, all his swords were gone, so what could he do? When would he ever stop running away like this? Or rather, where was he going? The snow falling from the sea of grass suddenly became somewhat dark. That was because of the change in the sky. A huge shadow covered the road and the wilderness in front of them. Like a wisp of smoke, Chen Chongqing broke through the wind and snow, rushing towards the depths of the shadow. The mausoleum of Zhou was there. The soles of the boots left a slight depression on the rough surface of the bluestone, and one could faintly see spiderweb-like cracks on the edges. The whistling cold wind rustled his clothes, which were as straight as a knife. Chen Chongqing continued to fly, quickly arriving at the middle section of the mausoleum of Zhou, at the end of that familiar mausoleum path. Back then, there used to be a green tree called the Tong Palace. He and Su Yorong faced the golden-winged great Ping that Nank had awakened, as well as the terrifying monster Tide. Sword Pool woke up. 10,000 swords turned into a dragon. The story of the past hadn't happened too long ago, but it already felt like a lifetime ago. The golden-winged Great Ping was absorbing the essence of the world in the homeland of the elf race, waiting for it to truly mature. Nank spent every night in Mount Li listening to the sound of the sword clear her heart. It was unknown when she would truly wake up. The monster beasts had lived a wonderful life for several years, but it was unknown whether they could continue after today. Today, his opponent was only one person, but he was no less terrifying than this person. In fact, he was even more terrifying. The pebbles at the edge of the altar were blown up by the wind, and only stopped when they touched the edge of the cloth shoes. Shang Xingzhou gazed at the mausoleum of Zhou, his expression finally changing. "I don't know what you've prepared here," he said to Chen Chongqing, "but just like I said at the very beginning, there are no miracles." Chen Chongqing replied, I believe that the appearance of a person like Zhou Dufu under the starry sky is already a sort of miracle. Regardless of what the later generations thought of Zhou Dufu, many people would agree with his view. The strongest expert under the starry sky, truly invincible throughout the world, was naturally a miracle. Hearing this, Shang Xingzhou was quiet for a while, and then he smiled. Do you know why Wang Jitsi doesn't like me, but is willing to help me? He looked at Chen Chongsheng and said, Do you know why the elders of our generation can scheme against each other, but when facing an external enemy, or in other words, when they are forced to the end, they will show a united will to fight against the external enemy? Chen Chongsheng replied, Because of your common experience. Shang Xingzhou calmly replied, Yes, because we once had a common enemy. Chen Chongsheng replied, I used to think it was the demons. Shang Xingzhou replied, The existence of the demons was naturally a reason for unity, but even more important was that person. Chen Chongsheng replied, I don't really understand. Shang Xingzhou replied, Because that person allowed us to clearly see ourselves, to clearly see each other. From then on, we could be frank and trust each other. Chen Chongsheng asked, To clearly see what you really want? Shang Xingzhou replied, At the same time, to clearly see how ugly our true thoughts are, because in the end, that is a shameless thing to do. Chen Chongsheng understood, but he could only remain silent. Shang Xingzhou indifferently said, You once killed Zhou, but compared to us, it was just child's play. Chen Chongsheng wanted to kill Zhou Tong. Back then, those people had killed Zhou Dufu. If you say that he was a miracle, shouldn't us who killed him be the true miracle? Shang Xingzhou's eyes were very cold, like he was looking at a dead man. Many years ago, even that person had been killed by them, let alone Chen Chongsheng. The most famous and longest-lasting riddle of the past 1,000 years had finally been answered. The conjectures of many people, the everlasting topic of discussion in the tea-houses and restaurants, had finally been confirmed. Without question, this was the deepest secret of the world. Chen Chongsheng, however, was very calm. He looked at Shang Xingzhou and asked, How can you be so sure that he's really dead? This was Zhou Dufu's mausoleum. He stood in front of the mausoleum and asked this question. It felt like he was asking this question on behalf of the person in the mausoleum. The cold wind rustled the sand in the wilderness, giving off a sound that seemed to have a sense of time. Shang Xingzhou's eyes narrowed. The illness is rather annoying. Do your best to recover as soon as possible, just like in the past year. Once again, I wish everyone good health. To be continued. Chapter 63. The mausoleum of Zhou spanned the heavens and earth, and also spanned between the two of them. Separated by several hundred zhang, they were only a small black dot in each other's field of vision. But they could clearly see each other's features and the emotions in their eyes. They didn't even need to look at each other to know what the other was thinking. No matter how unfamiliar they had been in the past few years, they were still master and disciple who had lived together in the temple for 10-some years. After some time, Shang Xingzhou said, He's already dead. Chen Chongsheng replied, I don't know how your story ended, but I know that his body is not in this mausoleum. Shang Xingzhou said, Given that brute's personality, if he was still alive, how could he endure the loneliness and not come out to make trouble? Chen Chongsheng was quiet for a while, then said, Yes, he should be dead, or else Emperor Taizong would not have been at ease. This is your final move? Using him to scare me off? Shang Xingzhou looked at him and mocked, Truly childish. Chen Chongsheng replied, Yes, I just wanted to scare you. Shang Xingzhou asked, Is there any meaning to it? Chen Chongsheng replied, Seeing Sir's appearance just now was truly very interesting. After saying this, he began to laugh, appearing very happy. For him, this was a very rare display of emotion. From this, one could tell that he was speaking the truth. The truth was the most hurtful. After coming to the capital from Xining village, whether it was the divine general of the East's granny, maid, or madam, or the students of the Ivy Academies, or even Tang 36, they had all been hurt by Qin Chongqing's truth. Even Shang Xingzhou, his master, found it somewhat difficult to bear. Shang Xingzhou's eyes grew even colder. He gazed at Qin Chongqing at the end of the mausoleum and took a step forward. In the garden of Zhou, he could not use the power of the laws above the divine domain, so he naturally could not ignore space. He could not directly reach Qin Chongqing. In reality, the distance he took with this step was neither too far nor too close. It was just one step. The wind rose from beneath his feet. His blue Taoist robe straightened. Several hundred faintly discernible rays of light followed the mausoleum and surged towards the main gate of the mausoleum of Zhou. The wind howled and the surrounding wilderness was covered in dust, gradually blotting out the sun. The world became gloomy. In this gloomy world of light, countless dense and clear cutting sounds could be heard. Countless straight and deep marks appeared on the surface of the tomb and the boulders on both sides. Some of the boulders turned black at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then, they melted and were blown into the finest sand by the wind. The clear light seemed ordinary, but in reality, it contained the principles of the flow of all things. It was a concrete manifestation of the Tao, and it possessed unimaginable power. Shang Xingzhou attacked with all his might and thousands of Tao techniques were within. How could Qin Chongqing fight against him? On the other side of the plains, the monster bull and the mountain-toppling fiend slowly stood up, transforming into two small black mountains. What was strange was that these two terrifying beasts didn't go to Qin Chongqing's aid. Instead, they retreated into the sandstorm that filled the sky. Due to the obstruction of the mausoleum of Zhou, Shang Xingzhou was unable to see this sight, nor was he able to see the ground that was exposed after the monster bull and mountain-toppling fiend left. Those two massive beasts had been silently guarding the north face of the mausoleum of Zhou precisely to block the ground. Those were four altar-like objects. They were already extremely damaged, but one could still vaguely make out that they were originally steel bases. Suddenly, the gales in the wilderness and the grasslands further away disappeared, as did the sandstorm. The warm sun reappeared at the edge of the grassland, hanging there quietly. The mausoleum of Zhou became incomparably quiet. Those tens of thousands of Tao techniques that represented the supreme principles of the world suddenly vanished. A string noiselessly snapped. 4 stone pearls fell from Qin Chongqing's wrist and rolled down the path of the mausoleum. These stone pearls appeared very ordinary, with nothing special about them. There was also nothing mystical about the way they fell. As they rolled down the path, they made a rolling sound, and when they collided with the boulders they made a crisp sound. It was like they would fall into the cracks between the boulders, never to roll out again or shatter into pieces. Whether it was in terms of probability or laws, this was a very likely occurrence. But none of this happened. The 4 stone pearls rolled down the path of the mausoleum, over the boulders. They seemed to have no purpose, but they accurately headed for the 4 altars in the north face of the mausoleum of Zhou. It was like in the process of rolling down, the 4 stone pearls had bestowed upon themselves some sort of meaning or purpose. With the passage of time, disorder tended to become order, chance becoming necessity. This was completely against the laws and principles of the world. Perhaps it was because these 4 stone pearls were existences that surpassed the laws of the world? It was completely unreasonable, yet it also gave off the feeling that it was only right and proper. The 4 stone pearls arrived at the bottom of the mausoleum of Zhou and separately fell into the 4 altars. The wind stirred once more, and then suddenly became chaotic. Accompanied by a particularly vast and profound feeling, the 4 monoliths appeared between the heavens and the earth. The earth trembled uneasily, and the incomprehensible howls of monsters came from the plains. The surfaces of these black monoliths were very smooth, carved with complex and incomprehensible patterns, as if they possessed some sort of magical power from the void. These were the heavenly tome monoliths that Zhou Dufu had taken from the mausoleum of Book. The light of the sky and the wind of the plains poured into the surface of the heavenly tome monoliths, and then vanished. Countless bits of grass and gravel also went with them, but they did not disappear. As if time was flowing backwards, the sand gradually wrapped around the heavenly tome monoliths, transforming them into stone pillars. The surface even seemed to be eroded by the wind and rain. Shang Xingzhou looked at Chen Chongqing and said, "These heavenly tome monoliths really did fall into your hands." Chen Chongqing replied, "Yes." Other than the two reasons he had chosen to challenge Shang Xingzhou in the Garden of Zhou, there was another reason. At his current level of cultivation, it was simply impossible for him to comprehend the ultimate mysteries of the heavenly tome monoliths, so he naturally could not use them. When he encountered the demon lord in the mountains and the angel of sacred light in White Emperor City, he could only treat the heavenly tome monoliths as indestructible weapons of infinite weight. Only in the Garden of Zhou could he use at least a portion of the heavenly tome monolith's true strength, because this place had the sacrificial altar and the array that Zhou Dufu had set up. The stone pillars that the heavenly tome monoliths had become were not stable. The surface constantly cracked and then reformed. Countless ancient qis seeped out from those cracks, transforming into terrifying clear lights. 4 clear lights floated down from the sky, precisely where Shang Xingzhou was. "You think that you can defeat me like this?" Shang Xingzhou turned his palm and slapped upwards. He stood on the ground, but when he extended his hand, he seemed to touch the dome of the sky. There was a light clap. The clear light flowed through the sky. Shang Xingzhou's face paled, but his expression remained indifferent. "Now it's time for you to choose." As the clear light flowed, several extremely thin cracks appeared in the dome of the sky. From the depths of the plain came the terrified shrieks of the herd of beasts. Perhaps they were recalling the day when the Garden of Zhou was on the verge of destruction. If Chen Chongqing continued to use the heavenly tome monoliths to attack Shang Xingzhou, he had a high chance of winning. But there was also a chance that the Garden of Zhou would be destroyed before that. This was the choice that Chen Chongqing had to make. At this moment, he truly missed those swords. "I'm gradually getting better. Thank you for your concern." To be continued. Chapter 64. I've received the handwritten copies of Choosing Heaven from a few of my book friends. I'm very touched. This New Year gift is really nice and meaningful. I'll talk about it in detail another day. Thank you, everyone. Using the array left behind by Zhou Dufu to display the true power of the heavenly tome monoliths to resist Shang Xingzhou was Chen Chongqing's plan. In those nights in the stone room of the Li Palace, this plan had already matured to perfection. But in the original plan, the South Stream Temple sword array should have already been set up around the mausoleum of Zhou. The several thousand famed swords that had returned to the plains would once more form a balance with the 4 heavenly tome monoliths, ensuring that the Garden of Zhou would not collapse. If all of these were put into practice, he would have a 70% chance of defeating his master. Unfortunately, all of his swords had been snatched away by Shang Xingzhou, so his chances of winning were naturally much lower. More importantly, without the suppression of several thousand ancient sword intents, the clear light emitted by the heavenly tome monoliths would most likely destroy the Garden of Zhou before it could defeat Shang Xingzhou. Shang Xingzhou only needed a single glance to understand Chen Chongqing's intentions, as well as the current situation. Therefore, he would not back down, nor would he admit defeat. He would persevere to the end, even if he did not hesitate to touch the seal of the Garden of Zhou. Chen Chongqing could continue to use the heavenly tome monoliths to attack until he defeated him, but the Garden of Zhou could be destroyed ahead of time. Otherwise, Chen Chongqing would have to take the 4 heavenly tome monoliths and leave the Garden of Zhou as quickly as possible. However, when he returned to the real world, without the restrictions of the Garden of Zhou, he was unable to display the power of the heavenly tome monoliths, and he had no sword. How could Chen Chongqing defeat him? It was a multiple-choice question. Shang Xingzhou looked at him quietly. The clear light falling from the sky was blocked by his palm. Endless winds and clouds were born and destroyed within it. In the end, everything in the world was often a multiple-choice question. It was easy to get tired of it. Chen Chongqing looked at Shang Xingzhou and asked, "Why do I always have to make the choice?" He was really angry, or rather annoyed. The angry question was carried far away by the wind. Shang Xingzhou's expression was indifferent. He had no intention of answering him. From Xining village to the capital, from the age of 10 until now, he had done far too many multiple-choice questions. He was truly annoyed. He really wanted to ask his master if it was annoying to do this all the time. But in the end, he didn't ask because he knew it was useless. Just like in the past few years, he was used to doing, not talking. No matter what choice he made. Or no choice at all. Yes, he really didn't want to choose today. His eyes were incomparably bright, just like the moonlight of Xuanyang City. His divine sense spread across the air and landed on Shang Xingzhou's sleeve. He tried to regain control of the vault sheath. Even if he couldn't, he could at least reconnect with the swords in the scabbard. He believed that as long as those swords sensed his divine sense, they would definitely follow his will and break out of the sheath, returning to this world. However, he failed. His face became even paler, like the snow in the wilderness. A trickle of blood flowed from the corner of his lip. He looked like a lonely wintersweet in the snowfield. Shang Xingzhou's right hand was still supporting the sky. The wind ruffled his sleeves, and the scabbard in his left hand could be vaguely seen. Chen Chongqing's gaze fell upon that direction. When making a choice, you can often see a person's truest courage, wisdom, and temperament. Shang Xingzhou looked at him and said, "You have disappointed me today, because you don't even have the courage to make a choice." Chen Chongqing said, "Since I will lose no matter what I choose, why should I choose?" Shang Xingzhou replied, "Because that is your fate." Many years ago, in Xining village's old temple, he had said something to Chen Chongqing. "You have an illness that cannot be cured. That is your fate." Today, he had said something similar again. "No matter what you choose, you will lose. That is also your fate." Chen Chongqing gazed at the distant plains, saying nothing for a long time. Shang Xingzhou calmly looked back, also saying nothing. After some time, Chen Chongqing drew back his gaze and said to Shang Xingzhou, "My illness has already been cured." Yes, his illness had already been cured. He was still alive. Thus, there was no such thing as fate. Thus, choice had its meaning. Whether he won or lost. It was very quiet both inside and outside the Orthodox Academy. People were everywhere in 100 Flowers Lane, but not a single noise could be heard. Their faces were covered in tension, anxiety, and worry. At this moment, everyone knew that Shang Xingzhou and Chen Chongqing were fighting in the garden of Zhou. They could not see sword glows or hear sword cries, so no one knew the specifics. But to experts of the divine like Wang Po and the Prince of Xiang, space could not isolate all information. Why was it that there was not even a sliver of sword intent in the Orthodox Academy? The Prince of Xiang seemed to be laughing and crying, his true emotions impossible to tell. His hands, which were clasping the fat on his abdomen, were subconsciously rubbing against it. Wang Po thought of a certain possibility, and his expression turned grave. At Tang 36's level of cultivation, it was naturally impossible for him to know what was going on in the garden of Zhou, but he had always been paying attention to the changes in Wang Po's expression. From start to now, his gaze had always been fixed on Wang Po's face through the crack in the window. This was his only source of information. Seeing Wang Po's expression, he vaguely guessed that the situation was not good, and his face paled. On the floor was a Ruyao azure cup that had been shattered into several pieces, and there were also some water and tea leaves. In his hand was a teapot, the tea in the pot already cold. He picked up the teapot and poured half of the cold tea into his mouth, but he still could not calm his madly beating heart, nor could he extinguish the flames of Tao in his heart. He charged out of the tea-house. Su Moyu could not stop him, allowing him to run straight to the gate of the Orthodox Academy. Linghai Jiwang and the others were surprised, thinking, just what is he doing here? The imperial court and the Li Palace had jointly decided that the Orthodox Academy would be sealed, with only Wang Jitze, Shang Xingzhou, and Chen Chongqing allowed inside. The Orthodoxy cavalry and black-armored cavalry stood guard around the academy, and countless cultivators had gathered, including experts on the level of Wang Pu and the Prince of Xiang. No one could even think about entering the Orthodox Academy at this time. Tang 36 paid no attention to those unkind and warning gazes. Before those princes could even open their mouths, he had already begun to curse. All of you, shut your mouths. This is the Orthodox Academy, and I'm the superintendent. Chen Chongqing isn't here, so I'm the one with the most authority. No one can enter because they don't agree. If I want to enter, whose agreement do I need? 100 Flowers Lane was thrown into chaos. Sword intents crisscrossed the air, and there were even a few crossbow bolts streaking across the sky. Wang Jitze turned his head from the lake shore and saw Tang 36. Tang 36 had naturally guessed that he was Wang Jitze, but he did not step forward to greet him. He straightforwardly asked, "How do I enter the Garden of Zhou?" Over the course of countless years, Wang Jitze had never encountered someone who knew his identity but did not care. He couldn't help but feel rather surprised and then interested. He opened his palm to reveal the black stone and said, "Enter through this door." Tang 36 said, "Give it to me." His request was very simple and clear. It took Wang Jitze a few moments to react. Why? The Garden of Zhou is Chen Chongqing's, so this thing is naturally his. He gave it to me, and this thing was originally mine. This time, it was Tang 36's turn to be stunned before he reacted. It was originally yours, which means that it's not yours anymore. And how old are you? If he gave it to you, you should take it. Wang Jitze had never met such an unreasonable person, so he quickly guessed at this kid's origins. He replied, "Not even your grandfather would dare to speak to me like this." "Nonsense, besides Emperor Taizong, who would dare to disrespect you?" Tang 36 changed the topic. "But today I have to congratulate you." Wang Jitze asked, "What is it?" "Congratulations on finally meeting another person besides Emperor Taizong that dares to talk back to you." Tang 36 looked at him and seriously said, "If you are not willing to give this thing to me, I will curse your mother." Wang Jitze arched his brows and said, "I am the referee for this match." Tang 36 said, "You were invited by Shang Xingzhou. I don't trust you." Wang Jitze replied, "The Pope trusts me." Tang 36 asked, "What does that have to do with me?" Wang Jitze calmly replied, "If I don't give it to you, what can you do?" Tang 36's reply was still concise and clear. The Wenshui sword was unsheathed, and 10,000 golden leaves appeared on the surface of the lake. Wang Jitze's expression subtly changed. It was not because of Tang 36's attack. It was because Tang 36 had pulled back his sword. Suicide. To be continued. Chapter 65. To say that Wang Jitze could crush Tang 36 like an ant with a single finger might be a bit of an exaggeration. But if he stretched out 2 fingers, he could definitely kill Tang 36 easily. The difference in strength between the two was just this great. It was impossible for Tang 36 to threaten Wang Jitze, and even seeking death in front of Wang Jitze would not be easy. The Wenshui sword held between 2 fingers by Wang Jitze remained motionless, unable to advance an inch. It was hard to avoid awkwardness when a tragic suicide had suddenly turned into this scene. But Tang 36 did not feel any awkwardness. He even raised his brows. Raising his brows meant provocation. His meaning was crystal clear. If one truly wanted to die, there were many ways to do so. Cutting one's throat with a sword was undoubtedly the least efficient method. He was waiting for Wang Jitze to stop him so that he could continue negotiating. Wang Jitze smirked at him and said, Even if I gave you this stone, it would be useless. Tang 36 saw his expression and understood. With his current level of cultivation, even with the black stone, he could not enter the garden of Zhou, nor could he help Chen Chongsheng. Tang 36 sincerely asked, "Then may I trouble sir to help?" Wang Jitsa said nothing. Tang 36 continued, "I know that his current situation is definitely very bad." Wang Jitsa's gaze fell on the black stone as he said, "Correct, he is currently facing an extremely difficult choice." Tang 36 was quiet for a while, then said, "He is a good person." As he said this, his attitude was unprecedentedly solemn. Wang Jitsa replied, "Yes." Tang 36 looked into his eyes and said, "A good person should not live so bitterly." Wang Jitsa replied, "This has nothing to do with good or bad." Tang 36 was rather disappointed and furious. He jeered, "Yes, it has nothing to do with good or bad, only with strength. In the end, it's just the strong bullying the weak." Wang Jitsa shook his head. "Every person has to take responsibility for their own choices." Tang 36 sneered, "Then why is it always him who makes the choice? Why can't it be your choice?" Wang Jitsa replied, "Shang Xingzhou agreed to fight him. This was a choice he was forced to make." Tang 36 said, "That choice is too complicated. Your choices should be simpler." Wang Jitsa asked, "Such as?" Tang 36 said, "You can choose to die or die." Wang Jitsa smiled and asked, "Are there any other options?" Tang 36 said, "You can also choose to be burned to death, drowned to death, pierced through the heart by 10,000 arrows, or die by 1,000 cuts." This was not a narration, but a command or perhaps a curse. The calm tone contained an extremely strong hatred. But all of this stemmed from helplessness. Looking at the thin ice and duckweed on the surface of the water, Tang 36 felt a little tired. Did he fail just like that? He really couldn't accept this. He was unwilling for Chen Chongsheng. He suddenly shouted towards the sky, "You're a blind dog!" The 100 Blossom Street was a bit chaotic, so he didn't know if they would hear what Tang 36 said. The herb garden, which was only one wall away from the Tradition Academy, could hear it very clearly. Yuren did not know what had happened and asked with his eyes, Tang wants to disturb Lord Wang's thoughts." Su Yorong said, "If there was even the slightest chance, he would use the methods in the old estate to force Lord Wang to compromise." This was referring to the conversation between the grandfather and grandson at the mahjong table. He had not hesitated to destroy the Tang clan, so he naturally did not care about the common people of the world. But it was obvious that this was still not enough to move Wang Jitsa or convince him. He could not even bring out the words and threats he truly wanted to say. Tang 36's attempt had also failed. Su Yorong's eyes were tinged with worry. Her left hand tightly gripped the 5 stone pearls. These 5 stone pearls had originally been the 5 heavenly tome monoliths of the Garden of Zhou, a part of Zhou Dufu's great array. Just a moment ago, the 5 stone pearls had faintly emitted some sort of ripple, allowing her to roughly understand the situation in the Garden of Zhou. She knew that Chen Chongsheng was facing a choice. She also knew what Chen Chongsheng would choose. Even before he made his choice. To Chen Chongsheng, this choice was not as difficult as Wang Jitsa had said. Because she understood Chen Chongsheng. Yuren also understood Chen Chongsheng. So he also knew what Chen Chongsheng would choose. This meant that Chen Chongsheng had lost. Every street and every house in the capital heard the massive boom that followed. Violent waves of qi appeared by the lake shore. The remaining snow, withered grass, and mud were sent flying into the air, striking against the walls and trees with a pitter-patter. The lake water roiled and trembled, sweeping up 1,000 piles of snow that flew through the air and then crashed back down. All of the Orthodox Academy was enveloped in this sudden torrential downpour. 2 figures suddenly appeared in the torrential rain. Chen Chongsheng and Shang Xingzhou. The sky suddenly brightened for an instant, as if a bolt of lightning had appeared. Borrowing the light that illuminated the gloomy downpour, one could faintly make out Shang Xingzhou's hand resting on Chen Chongqing's chest. Chen Chongqing was sent flying like a stone, smashing through tensome thick trees and falling deep into the forest. With a crack, the trees smashed into the ground, quaking and uneasy. Tang 36 raised the Wenshui sword and prepared to charge over, his left hand hidden in his sleeve tightly gripping a magical artifact. There was a light clap. Wang Jitse's finger had fallen between his eyebrows. Tang 36 could no longer move. Two golden-red flames suddenly appeared in the 100-herb garden. Su Yorong vanished from her spot. Wang Jitse did not turn his head, only pointed behind him. Behind him was the academy wall. A gap several zhang wide appeared in the wall. The bricks and the broken pieces of the wooden door quietly fell to the ground. A cool breeze lingered in the gap, seemingly gentle, yet insurmountable. A pure white feather drifted down from the air. Su Yorong appeared. Wang Jitse suddenly sensed something and turned around to look. His gaze was not on Su Yorong, but behind her. The 100-herb garden was just as serene and quiet as it had been several centuries ago. A walking stick quietly rested on the edge of the stone table. The tree was broken, the fresh stubble spreading like flower petals. Chen Chongqing sat against the broken tree, coughing incessantly. Shang Xingzhou asked, "Do you still insist that choice has meaning?" Chen Chongqing replied, "Yes, because the choice determines who we are." Shang Xingzhou fell silent. Chen Chongqing was correct. If it were Su Yorong or Tang 36 in the Garden of Zhou, he would not have given them the chance to choose. He had given Chen Chongqing the choice because he knew what Chen Chongqing would choose. It was precisely because of this that Chen Chongqing was Chen Chongqing. Thus, choice had meaning. But there was no meaning in fighting now. Chen Chongqing could still stand, but it was already foreordained that he could not win. By choosing to leave the Garden of Zhou, he had given up on his final hope of victory. Shang Xingzhou's expression was rather wooden. Concede. Chen Chongqing's tone was very flat. No. Shang Xingzhou fell silent, his right hand gripping the hilt of his sword. Not the stainless sword, but his own Taoist sword. Chen Chongqing prepared to stand, his right hand resting on the broken tree. Suddenly, his hand touched something hard. There were too many matters at home. My mood was rather irritable, and I wrote very bitterly. Fortunately, the quality of the final product was rather good. To be continued. Chapter 66. The title of the chapter has nothing to do with 36, nor does it have anything to do with the famous screenwriter. It's purely for fun, and I truly feel that Chen Chongqing and Tang Tang are very six. The Orthodox Academy had a long history, even earlier than the Great Zhou had been founded. Countless great trees had grown here, some of them even over 1,000 years old. Quite a few ancient trees had been destroyed in that bloody incident 20 years ago, but even more had survived. This was especially true of the forest near the imperial palace, where its branches and leaves were even more luxuriant and serene. When he had first entered the Orthodox Academy, Chen Chongqing had noticed this forest. Later on, he had spent countless mornings here, practiced the sword countless times. He knew that these trees were very hard, and their stubble was naturally very hard as well, but he still found it rather strange. That object was very hard, but its edge was not sharp. Rather, it was rather smooth, as if it had been polished. He turned his head and saw that where the tree had been cut off, there was a hole about a foot deep. The leaves obscured the already gloomy light, and the hole was covered in snow and dust, making it very difficult to see what was inside. Then before it had been cut off, this place had presumably been a tree hole. The object that his right hand had touched was in this hole. In other words, that object had always been stuck in this tree hole. Chen Chongqing had not been able to confirm what that object was. Shang Xingzhou's sword had arrived. The Taoist sword of the Monastery of Eternal Spring, imbued with the purest yet most ungentle aura, cut through the cold wind and descended upon his chest. While Shang Xingzhou was walking towards Chen Chongxing, Su Yorong was also walking towards the Orthodox Academy. Wang Jitsa once more pointed through the air. The gentle breeze by the lake was unruffled, and there was no shrill cry. It was like nothing had happened. But in reality, an invisible barrier had once more appeared between the Orthodox Academy and the 100-herb garden. At this moment, Su Yorong made a very strange action. She raised her left hand and lightly pointed at the air. Pop! There was a light sound. It was like the most fragile of blisters had been pierced by the softest of hairs. The invisible barrier vanished without a trace. Su Yorong had finally stepped into the Orthodox Academy. Her face was snow-white and an extremely thin stain of blood had appeared at the corner of her lips. Wang Jitsa had not used a finger technique, but the star-seizing hand he had created while studying in his old residence in Donglin Lane. He did not expect Su Yorong to be able to withstand this move. This made him a little surprised. What shocked him even more was that upon arriving at the Orthodox Academy, Su Yorong did not even glance at him. Instead, she looked at the master and disciple in the forest. A cool breeze blew, causing his white robes to flutter. The tong bow was in his hand, the wu arrow knocked to the string, ready to fire at any time. The situation became extremely tense. She was prepared to use the wu arrow to stop Shang Xingzhou. Could it be that Wang Jitsa would not stop her? Or did she believe that someone would stop Wang Jitsa? Who was that person? Naturally, it couldn't be Tang 36. Under Wang Jitsa's control, he had already become a statue by the lake. Because he couldn't turn his head, he couldn't see what was happening in the forest. He could only look at the lake and the sky. It was no longer snowing, but the clouds had yet to disperse. They covered the sky and made the capital seem especially gloomy. In the beginning, he was complaining and shouting that God was blind. At this moment, he was only praying for Chen Chongxing, hoping that the heavens would quickly open their eyes. Suddenly, a clear cry came from the forest. His eyes suddenly lit up. A hole appeared in the clouds. The light of the heavens poured down like a waterfall, beautiful to the extreme. Tang 36 thought in shock. Could it really be that person who opened their eyes? The body of a dragon, like a black mountain range, slowly rose and fell behind the clouds, stirring up countless strong winds. After the little black dragon left the Orthodox Academy, she did not go far. Instead, she stealthily approached this place, ready to break through the clouds and descend at any moment. If Chen Chongxing really did encounter danger, she didn't care about the rules of the match. As for that referee, she had long ago wanted to fight him to the death. The sea of clouds suddenly roiled, tearing a crack in the sky. She looked at the ground in astonishment. She saw the streets of the capital, the mausoleum of books, the imperial palace. Finally, she saw the Orthodox Academy. Where the Orthodox Academy and the imperial palace met was a gloomy forest. That forest suddenly brightened. It was not because of the heavenly light pouring down from the sky, but because of a sword glow. Some broken trees were arranged in a straight line, pointing into the deepest part of the forest. The broken tree that had once existed there had already vanished, transformed into countless pieces of bark and wood that quietly floated in the air. Floating along with these pieces of bark and wood was the light snow that had begun to fall this morning and the lake water that had fallen like a torrential rain not too long ago. There were two figures in this strange scene. Shang Xingzhou stood in front of Chen Chongxing, looking down from above, his Dao sword already swinging down. Chen Chongxing did not die, because a sword had appeared in his hand. It was precisely this sword that had blocked Shang Xingzhou's sword. Chen Chongxing was still using the stupid sword. This sword style was considered by Suli to be the #1 defensive sword style in the world, and it had saved Chen Chongxing's life countless times. Just now in the Garden of Zhou, Chen Chongxing had relied on this sword style to escape from death many times. But this time, Chen Chongxing was not sent flying. His left foot sank deep into the ground, so stable that it seemed to have grown root. This was a sword style in the first place. Only by using the sword could one truly display its subtlety and power. The question was, where had this sword come from? No one had the time to ponder this question. A clear whistle resounded through the forest. Shang Xingzhou's Taoist sleeve drifted, the Tao sword rising and then falling. The wind and snow rose with it. Shang Xingzhou's figure vanished. Countless sword glows appeared. The forest was covered in sword slashes. It suddenly fell silent. Chen Chongqing raised his sword to meet them. Clang! 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 Several dozen clear clangs of swords suddenly resounded around his body. In such a short period of time, Shang Xingzhou had struck out several dozen times. These swords had descended so quickly that not even the sound of two swords clashing could be heard. But Chen Chongqing had caught all of these swords. He raised his sword to his brow. His left knee slightly bent. He stood at his original position. He did not move. No matter how profound and indescribable, how unfathomable your sword intent was, I only need to raise my sword horizontally, sink my heart, and then hide in the house. This was the true sword domain. But under Shang Xingzhou's storm-like attacks, just how long could he last? Even if he possessed a perfect sword domain and star domain, possessed an unimaginably abundant amount of true essence, he still could not last forever. And what sort of person was Shang Xingzhou? He cultivated tens of thousands of Taoist techniques, so who knew what other terrifying techniques were hidden in his drooping sleeves? Chen Chongqing was not prepared to give his master this chance. At some unforeseeable moment, which he knew would come, he had taken the initiative to strike. A sword glow illuminated the secluded forest. This strike was unimaginably fast, like a true bolt of lightning. The sword intent of this strike was very clear, but not simple. It was like a fish swimming in the stream, right in front of him, but very difficult to reach out and touch. The trajectory of this sword was even more mysterious to the extreme. It actually gave off a feeling that even gods and ghosts couldn't predict it. This strike consecutively pierced through 3 pieces of tree bark, cut through several splinters of wood, and bypassed his left hand, seemingly carelessly stabbing into the wind and snow. A muffled groan sounded out from somewhere, and the wind and snow became slightly disorderly. Shang Xingzhou appeared on the snowy ground several zhang away, a tear in his sleeve. Chen Chongqing stood up straight, holding the sword in his hand, and quietly looked at him. To be continued. Chapter 67. The chilly wind rustled the fallen leaves on the trees, and the forest was quiet. Tree bark, sawdust, and snowflakes gradually fell. Only the remnant sword intent lingered in the cold wind for a long time. It was like the smoke that lingered after the firecrackers quieted down, indicating what exactly had happened. Seeing that Chen Chongqing was about to die, the situation of the battle suddenly changed greatly, even showing signs of reversing. It was all because of the sword in his hand. He looked at Shang Xingzhou silently. This did not mean that he was uneasy, but rather confident. As long as he had the sword in his hand, what was there to fear? As Su Li's successor, Chen Chongqing's talent in the sword could be considered world-shaking. Several years ago, armed with these swords, he had defeated powerful enemies in succession, and had even charged into the alley of the Northern Military Department alone, shocking countless onlookers. Several years later, he learned the Unity sword art on Holy Maiden Peak, comprehended the true meaning of the path of the sword at Mount Li, and used his own strength to lay down the sword array of South Stream Temple in White Emperor City. He defeated the Demon Lord and saved the White Emperor. His cultivation in the path of the sword finally reached great success, and he became the publicly acknowledged Grandmaster of the sword. Even though he was still very young, and according to common sense, it was very difficult to associate him with the word master. His strongest technique was the sword of wind and rain. Shang Xingzhou had long since been prepared. From the very start of the battle, He had used the trump card he had hidden for many years to seize all of his swords. In the Garden of Zhou, he had beaten him to the point where he could not retaliate at all. At this moment, a sword appeared in Chen Chongqing's hand. Even a master of the sword Dao would not be able to casually wield a sword and go on a rampage. This sword was obviously not ordinary. At the very least, it could communicate with his mind. Shang Xingzhou looked down at the sword. It was unknown how many years the sword had withstood the wind and rain, or how many years it had been hidden in the tree. Originally, it did not have any aura, just like an ordinary iron rod. If the tree hadn't been broken by Chen Chongqing, no one would have noticed its existence. Today, Chen Chongqing pulled it out from the tree hole. The dust and stains on the surface of the sword had completely disappeared. It was as bright as if it had been washed, and its sharpness was revealed. It was like a pearl that had been covered in dust for many years, like a phoenix that had not cried for many years, finally releasing its brilliance and shocking the world with a single brilliant feat. Shang Xingzhou raised his eyebrows slightly. The age of this sword was extremely ancient, and it was most likely from the sword pool. However, everyone knew that the famous swords of the previous generation that Chen Chongqing had brought out of the Garden of Zhou were all in the vault sheath. The scabbard was in his sleeve. So where did this sword come from? Could it be that Chen Chongqing had already predicted that he could control the vault sheath, so he played along and prepared beforehand, hiding the sword in the tree, wanting to catch him off guard? No, from Chen Chongqing's reaction, he probably didn't know that there was a sword in the tree. Judging from the moss on the blade, the sword had been hidden in the tree for at least a few years. Let alone Chen Chongqing, even if Black Robe and Wang Jitsa joined hands, with Su Yurong on the side using her fated star plate to calculate 100 times, it would still be impossible for them to guess today's situation several years in advance. Moreover, if Chen Chongqing had predicted his moves beforehand, he would have had a better way to deal with it and wouldn't have been forced into such a situation. Could it be that this sword did not originate from the sword pool of the Garden of Zhou, but had been hidden in a tree by some teacher or student of the Orthodox Academy? Shang Xingzhou thought that the person who had hidden the sword might have been one of his former followers, and his mood became rather complex. The sword had been hidden in the tree hole for many years without being discovered, but today, Chen Chongqing had taken it out with a stretch of his hand, when Chen Chongqing needed a sword the most. Was this a coincidence? Or was it a so-called lucky chance? Or was this a hint from fate? The lakeside of the Orthodox Academy and the 100-herb garden on the other side of the wall were both very quiet. Su Yurong put down the tong bao. Yuren stood by the stone table, leaning on his cane. Wang Jitsa drew back his finger. They silently gazed at the scene in the depths of the forest, each with a different expression. All of this had happened very briefly, but they had roughly understood the truth of the matter. In the Garden of Zhou, for some reason, Chen Chongqing had lost all his swords, so he could only passively take a beating. It was very dangerous. At the most dangerous moment, Chen Chongqing had pulled out a sword from the broken tree and changed the entire situation. But why was there a sword in that tree? Tang 36 could move, but he did not. Because Chen Chongqing had already escaped from his dangerous situation, and also because his mood was rather strange. He felt that this matter had something to do with him, but he could not think of the reason. In 100 Flowers Lane, the dense clanging of swords could also be heard. The quarrel caused by Tang 36's intrusion into the Orthodox Academy was settled, the confrontation and possible conflict vanishing. The crowd looked over in shock and nervousness. Wang Po opened his eyes and looked at the Orthodox Academy. He was somewhat surprised but also very gratified. But the Prince of Xiang closed his eyes. In a very short time, he seemed to age several years. Shang Xingzhou looked at Chen Chongqing and asked, "You knew there was a sword here?" Chen Chongqing replied, "I didn't." As he gazed at the sword in his hand, he naturally felt a sense of familiarity, even intimacy. It was like a schoolmate, a former comrade, or at least a kindred spirit. Thus, he knew the origin of this sword. This sword had once been a member of the sword pool, had once fought side by side with him. At that time, the 10,000 swords were like a dragon, and it was a dragon scale. But it had been many years since they had last met. So you were here. And why are you here? A burst of laughter suddenly came from the lakeside. Ha 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 ha! It was a laugh of extraordinary gaiety, of penetrating pain, and above all of an obnoxious complacency. It's me. In the end, it's still me. Tang 36 repeated, his face brimming with arrogance. Wang Jitsa froze, thinking, what sort of madness has this young man gone mad? Tang 36 roared to the entire world. I hid this sword here back then. Chen Chongqing stared blankly, finally recalling this matter of the past. He couldn't help but laugh. For more information, please refer to Volume 3, Chapter 29, The Story of the Devilish Children and the Sword. To me, these interesting places are one of the main sources of happiness in writing novels. The title of today's chapter naturally reminded me of Chao Xiaoshu, and then I thought of Long Qing, and then I thought of Ning Ke, and then I thought of that extraordinary author. The novels I write are all very good. Today is New Year's Eve, and I am still writing novels. It feels very good. I wish everyone a happy new year. Drink in moderation, take care of your health, and the happiness of your entire family. Tomorrow will be the beginning of the annual vacation. I will return to meet everyone on the 11th. I will strive to write this paragraph as quickly and powerfully as possible. To be continued. Chapter 68. That incident happened several years ago. It was rumored that there was a sword pool in the garden of Zhou, and within the sword pool were countless famous swords of previous generations. The legend was true. Chen Chongqing had discovered the sword pool in the garden of Zhou, and then brought those countless famous swords back to this world. Famed swords with legacies like the temple sword had been sent back to their respective sects in the name of the Li Palace, but there were still many swords left. Thus, on a very ordinary night, the Orthodox Academy held a meeting to divide the spoils. Xianyuan Per received the Mountain Sea Sword, Zhixiu received the Demon Commander's Banner Sword, and Luoluo received an even better gift. Afterwards, Su Mou received a flower sword named Beauty Yu, and even Mou received a Yu Maiden sword from Chen Chongqing. Tang 36 did not change his sword, because his Wenshui sword was also a famous sword, and also the symbol of the Tang clan. No one knew that he had also asked Chen Chongqing for a sword. However, he did not bring the sword with him. Instead, he stabbed it into the hollow of an ancient pagoda tree in the depths of the secluded forest. Then, he carefully disguised it with fallen leaves and rotten mud. Chen Chongqing didn't understand what was going on. Tang 36 said that he was nurturing the sword. Decades or even centuries later, a short student from a poor family would suddenly hear a folk song from the southeast on an ordinary morning after being bullied by his classmates. He would burst into tears and rush into a small forest to smash the trees, exchanging physical pain for mental comfort. Suddenly, he discovered that a famous sword used by a swordsman of the previous generation had suddenly fallen out of a hole in an ancient tree. There was even a strand of sword intent attached to it. His ethereal palace was instantly stimulated, and all of his chi openings were ignited. This was Tang 36's description at that time. He thought that what he had done would become a legend of the Orthodox Academy for decades, or even centuries. He didn't think that after only a few years, this sword would see the light of day again and return to Chen Chongqing's hands. He had even forgotten the existence of this sword. But now, it seemed that this sword, at the most dangerous moment, saved Chen Chongqing's life. This would also decide the outcome of the struggle between the orthodoxy and the imperial court, deciding the direction the continent would take several years from now. In other words, the entire history would change. This was all thanks to the fact that he had hidden a sword here. It didn't matter whether he remembered it or not. After all, he was the one who hid the sword here. What do you mean by everything is predestined? What was the meaning of the grass-snake gray line stretching for 1,000 miles? Every move had a deeper meaning. How could there be any idle moves? The more Tang 36 thought, the happier he was. His laughter grew louder and louder, and his expression became more and more arrogant. Chen Chongqing understood the cause and effect of this matter. Apart from being shocked, he couldn't help but feel emotional. This feeling of being arranged by fate was like picking up the lost time again. But Wang Jitze and the others did not know of that period of time, nor did they know of that story, so they did not understand why Tang 36 was laughing. To Shang Xingzhou, Chen Chongqing's smile was much more detestable than that sword. You want to change everything with a rusted sword? He looked at Chen Chongqing and said indifferently. His eyes were very pale, like ice that had just condensed. In the depths of his eyes, a spark was burning. He took a deep breath. There was a strong wind in the woods. With the help of the wind, the fire began to burn extremely quickly. In an instant, it spread from the bottom of the eye to the surface. His indifferent eyes suddenly became the color of lava. They seemed extremely terrifying and scorching hot. The wind rose, blowing away all the clouds over the Orthodox Academy. One could faintly make out a black dot. The clouds dispersed, revealing the true face of the sun. A qi descended from the sky. To be more precise, it descended along with the sunlight onto Shang Xingzhou's body. This qi was not pure, but rather heterogeneous. However, it did not affect its power, only added a hint of fierceness to it. With the arrival of this qi, the accumulated snow on the forest floor instantly melted. The temperature in the Orthodox Academy seemed to rise. Shang Xingzhou was still standing at his original spot, but he seemed to be in the sky. His figure seemed incomparably tall, giving off the feeling that it filled the world. In the eyes of the distant Su Yorong and the others, he had become the world's most precipitous mountain. In the eyes of the nearby Chen Chongqing, he was more like the white tiger that obscured half the sky in White Emperor City. At the time, he had seen the White Emperor's soul, but now he saw Shang Xingzhou himself. The puddles of water suddenly dried up, the mist instantly vanished, and the fallen leaves on the withered grass began to roll up. This fierce and scorching qi came from the sun, and it also came from Shang Xingzhou's body. They met at the boundary between the inside and the outside. With a boom, Shang Xingzhou's Taoist robe began to burn. His two sleeves transformed into countless butterflies that flew off, revealing his bare arms. The sleeves were completely burned to ash, so the wound left by Chen Chongqing's sword naturally vanished as well. Shang Xingzhou gripped his sword with both hands, the muscles on his arms bulging like a sail stretched taut by the wind, or like a statue cast from iron. It seemed unreal, yet it also seemed like the most real of existences, filled with the most vivid life energy. In a very short period of time, he seemed to have become several hundred years younger. He walked over to Chen Chongqing, looking nothing like an old man. When the clouds parted and the sunlight shone down, causing the Orthodox Academy to become somewhat brighter, Su Yorong thought of a certain possibility. Her expression flickered, but she did not go over, because Chen Chongqing had a sword in his hand, and also because Wang Jitze was present. It was obvious that Wang Jitze had long since known of this secret, so he was not the slightest bit moved. Perhaps to those old people from back then, this had never been a secret at all. Yuren leaned on his walking stick as he stood by the table. His gaze pierced through the black hair, through the broken wall, and into the depths of the forest, his thoughts inscrutable. Tang 36 had stopped smiling long ago. He was so shocked that he couldn't speak, thinking, how is this possible? The blazing sun style? The blazing sun style. Who's using the blazing sun style? How could it be so tyrannical and orthodox? Who? The change in qi in the Orthodox Academy had already reached 100 Flowers Lane, triggering a series of shocked shouts. The tensome princes of the Chun clan were even more shocked. Only when they recalled that Chun Chong Xing was also surnamed Chin did they calm down a little. They had never treated Chun Chong Xing as a relative, but Chun Chong Xing was still of the imperial clan's bloodline. In their view, it was not unimaginable that Chun Chong Xing could learn the Blazing Sun style. This was because they did not know that Chun Chong Xing's fate will had been destroyed while he was still in his mother's womb. The Prince of Zhongshan knew this secret, so his face was rather gloomy for some reason. The Prince of Xiang opened his eyes, a spark flashing in the depths of his eyes. It did not burn, but quickly died out. He knew that it could not be Chun Chong Xing, so it could only be Shang Xingzhou. The problem was that Shang Xingzhou was not a member of the imperial clan, so how could he cultivate the Blazing Sun style? Just what was the relationship between Shang Xingzhou and Emperor Taizong? Suddenly, a harsh light flashed through the Prince of Xiang's eyes as he shouted, "What do you want to do?" Countless sounds of metal scraping against metal and the tightening of sacred light crossbows came from the gate of the Orthodox Academy. The atmosphere instantly became extremely tense, because the moment the clouds parted and the sun shone down, Wang Pe made a movement. His brows rose. To be continued. Chapter 69. Wang Pe had a very unique pair of eyebrows. To be precise, it was the relative position between the eyebrows. The distance between his eyebrows and eyes was a little close, and the ends of his eyebrows were a little droopy, so he looked a little shabby. However, when he raised his eyebrows, they would separate from his eyes. That was the beginning of heaven and earth. At the same time, the end of his eyebrows would shoot up like a spear towards the heavens, incomparably majestic. In short, when he raised his eyebrows, it had nothing to do with the word shabby. Moreover, when he raised his eyebrows, his shoulders would rise as well. Compared to his eyebrows, Wang Pe's shoulders were more famous. Because they drooped for a longer period of time, they were more easily seen. When he moved his shoulders, he would often draw his blade. Just like at this very moment, an extremely sharp saber intent suddenly appeared in 100 Flower Lane and soared into the sky. Several hundred sacred light crossbows, and all the weapons in the hands of the imperial court's experts, were aimed at Wang Pe. The Prince of Xiang had a grave expression, his hands long ago leaving the fat on his belt. Wang Pe said nothing, only quietly gazed at the Orthodox Academy. Just like the Prince of Xiang, he knew that the person using the Blazing Sun style was not Chun Chong Xing. It could only be Shang Xingzhou. Just what was the relationship between Shang Xingzhou and Emperor Taizong? Could it be that he's also a member of the Chun imperial family? Wang Pe did not think about these questions. Instead, he was thinking about the records that his father's generation had painstakingly preserved. In those accounts, in addition to the most striking and bloody words, the destruction of the family, there were also many scenes of the miserable wind and rain. In those images, there was a young man with a gloomy temperament. According to the judgment of the Wang clan's ancestor, that young man was the instigator of the raid and should be a member of the imperial family. However, whether it was at the time or afterwards, no one was able to find out that young man's identity. In short, that young man brought a lot of misery to the Wang family. Wang Pe had never met Emperor Taizong, but Emperor Taizong was still his enemy, because this was a family grudge. Of course, the young man from back then was also his enemy. He had thought that the man had already disappeared in the long river of history, but today, he discovered that it was highly possible that the man was still alive. The atmosphere outside the Orthodox Academy was abnormally tense. Wang Pe looked at the courtyard gate in silence. In the end, his shoulders drooped again. At the same time, his eyebrows drooped. There seemed to be thousands of sighs in 100 Flowers Lane. It wasn't regret but joy. The Blazing Sun style was a very powerful and special cultivation method. The myriad of Taoist techniques in the world were all based on the true essence transformed from star brilliance. Only the Blazing Sun art did not gather starlight, but sunfire. Sunfire was not as clear and gentle as starlight, but in terms of power it was far superior. However, it was precisely because it was too blazing hot that cultivators were unable to harvest it and convert it into true essence. After the descent of the heavenly tome monoliths, the human race began to cultivate the Tao. For countless years, only the Chun clan, due to the unique structure of their fate wheel, could cultivate this method. No matter if it was the books of Taoism or the books of history, all of them took this to be the heaven Tao's favor towards the Chun clan. So no matter if it was a time of chaos or peace, the Chun clan possessed an extraordinary status in Tianliang County and even the entire continent. It was as if they were innately covered in a divine radiance. In the last 1,000 years, countless experts had emerged from the Chun clan, like the young hero Chun Xuanba and Emperor Taizong. Of course, there was also the rumored once wise and divine Prince Chu. Even today, the Chun imperial clan continued to produce more and more experts. The Tensum princes in 100 Flowers Lane were all experts, and the Prince of Xiang had already stepped into the divine domain. Together with the descendants of the imperial clans scattered throughout the world, this was truly an extremely powerful force. But in the last few years, with the Tianhai Divine Empress before him and Shang Xingzhou behind him, this force had never been truly displayed. But how could Shang Xingzhou cultivate the blazing sun art? Was he an imperial clan member? Just what was his relationship with Emperor Taizong? These questions flashed through Chen Chongqing's mind, but they very quickly vanished, leaving no trace behind. He had already guessed this in the Garden of Zhou, but now he had just received confirmation. And Shang Xingzhou had once more walked in front of him. He gripped his sword with both hands and slashed it down at Chen Chongqing's head. This sword was very simple, without any moves or profound intent. It just chopped down in a straight line. The sun shone on his black hair, which was tightly bound, and glinted. The sun shone on his bare arms, glinting. The sunlight shone on his Taoist sword, reflecting light. He was like a god. The sword in his hand could cut through everything in the world. First was the sky. In the azure sky, a line that seemed both real and fake appeared. An awe-inspiring sword intent accompanied by a dazzling ray of light descended upon Chen Chongqing's head. Chen Chongqing did not know if he could receive it. He was rather nervous, and it was also because the sword glow was too dazzling, so he squinted his eyes. There was often a connection between the most minute movements of humans. As he squinted, he subconsciously tightened his grip. And then, his palm tightened around the hilt of the sword. The hilt of the sword was rather hard. After being hidden in the hollow of a tree for several years, its surface was somewhat slippery, perhaps due to moss or rotten mud. This feeling was not unfamiliar, as he had held countless swords, but it was not exactly familiar. He was sure that he had never held this sword before. There were far too many swords in the sword pool, so he could not be familiar with each one. He also did not know the name or origin of this sword. But he knew that the object he held was straight, hard, and sharp. This was a sword. Then it was fine. Sword met sword. It was like the cold air descending south from the frigid snowfields meeting the heat waves from the western sea. There was a sudden clap of thunder. The lake water shook into waves, then into waterfalls, then into torrential rain, washing everything between heaven and earth from different angles. Dozens of thick and sturdy ancient trees slowly fell with a cracking sound. Between the flying sawdust and branches, one could faintly see the sunken ground. Countless cracks, both deep and shallow, appeared on the walls of the 100-herb garden. Nearby, the imperial palace automatically created an array. As the clear light fell, everything was covered in a mysterious cloak. In Wang Zhice's eyes, this was very similar to Taoist Wu's recent paintings. The brush strokes were extremely simple, even deliberately crude, but the colors were extremely bold. For example, the red that was like blood and rust. The dust settled. Chen Chongqing half knelt by the lake, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. Even more frightening was that there was no sword in his hand. The sword had fallen on the grass far away, stuck in the ground at an angle. It looked like a broken flag, but also like a tombstone. The sword was still trembling, emitting a faint hum, not a mournful hum, but somewhat apologetic. Shang Xingzhou appeared in front of Chen Changsheng. It was also very difficult for him to break the defensive sword technique that Su Li had passed on to Chen Changsheng. But he had the blazing sun style. He had still suppressed his cultivation to below the divine domain, but by relying on the blazing sun style, he possessed an unimaginable and endless strength. No matter how formidable a sword technique was, it could not endure this sort of crushing strength, and for a long time at that. In this process, Shang Xingzhou had consumed more true essence and paid a price than Chen Changsheng. But Chen Changsheng had no sword. Shang Xingzhou indifferently looked at him and raised the sword in his hand. He did not believe that his disciple would have such good luck that he would be able to find a sword in a broken tree. Strangely, there was no panic on Chen Changsheng's face. His eyes were also as calm as the waters of a lake. Then, he plunged his hand into the lake and took out a sword. To be continued. Chapter 70. He could catch fish in the lake because there were fish in it, but there was no sword in the lake. Moreover, Chen Changsheng did not touch it, but directly took it. This was an even more concise and powerful action, indicating that he knew where the sword was in advance. Like a magic trick, he took out a sword from the lake. Then he thrust it at Shang Xingzhou. The water splashed along the blade, and the sword light rose up, illuminating the lake from inside out. The lake shore became brighter, and the splashes were like silver trees, and also like stars. Tensome starlight lit up, following the lines of stars in the night sky, and his figure suddenly faded. Shang Xingzhou stepped on the stars and retreated, instantly retreating Tensum Zhang. There was a light rip. There was a tear in his collar. A stream of blood seeped out, like a black plum flower painted on his blue Taoist robe. Master, admit defeat. Chen Changsheng said to Shang Xingzhou. The lake water dripped from the tip of his sword and fell on the rocks, making dripping sounds, as if urging him. Shang Xingzhou did not answer. He calmly walked forward, once again arriving in front of him. He gripped the sword with both hands and raised it above his head. His bare arms glistened in the sunlight, like a real statue, perfectly displaying his strength. There was still no sword technique, no profound meaning, just the simplest slash. With a crack, the air and the sword fiercely rubbed against each other, creating a dazzling flame. A scorching, violent chi emanated from Shang Xingzhou's body and the sun. The blood on his blue Taoist robe instantly evaporated into smoke. The water on Chen Changsheng's sword also turned into smoke, disappearing without a trace. The beautiful sword light rose again, but it was not aimed at Shang Xingzhou. Chen Changsheng knew that Shang Xingzhou would not respond to his sword, so no matter how fast it was meaningless. He could only draw back. Clang! The two swords met again. Thunder rose from the lake shore over the courtyard walls and resounded throughout the capital. Torrential rain came again, the walls toppled, the trees fell, the wind howled, the shore collapsed, and the lake flooded in all directions. Tensome large and small ponds appeared on the grass. Shang Xingzhou and Chen Changsheng had disappeared. They came to the treasure vault behind the grass. The stone steps to the vault were covered in cobwebs and slightly sunken. Chen Changsheng lay inside, his hands on the ground, preparing to stand. The sword he took from the lake flew away again. His stupid sword did not break, but it was also unable to withstand Shang Xingzhou's tyrannical sword. The remnant wind blew against the green Taoist robe, causing it to flutter. Several cracks appeared on the robe. Shang Xingzhou walked towards the treasury. Chen Changsheng didn't turn his head. His right hand landed on the broken part of the stairs and pulled out. Accompanied by the sound of metal rubbing against gravel, a sword appeared in his hand. His movements were very natural, as if he had long been prepared and had practiced it countless times. No matter how inconceivable a scene was, It was hard to be surprised after it had appeared so many times. Shang Xingzhou's expression did not change. Chen Chongqing stood up, looked at him and said seriously, "Master, just admit defeat." Shang Xingzhou still did not speak. He walked forward in silence and swung the Taoist sword with both hands. The sunlight shone on the sword and his bare arms. The patterns and muscles on the sword were so clear. The aura of life and the smell of death were equally strong. It was like strong alcohol, intoxicating or frightening. With a loud bang, smoke and dust flew everywhere. A deep ravine appeared in front of him. The pitch-black and bright floorboards constantly rose up and then collapsed. Between the collapsed bookshelves, there were old books flying everywhere. He had once spent every night here gazing at the stars. Luoluo had also accompanied him here for many nights. However, his master had spent more time here than he had. The windows were shattered. Chen Chongqing landed in the fountain in the front courtyard, his entire body drenched. The fangs of the sacred lion statue protruded from its mouth, and it also sprayed water. A stream of water as thick as a finger fell on his head, a rather comical sight. He was already very close to the gate of the academy. He could hear the nervous gasps and gasps of surprise coming from 100 Flowers Lane. The people of 100 Flowers Lane could hear him fall into the fountain. Experts like Wang Pe, the Prince of Xiang, the Prince of Zhongshan, and Linghai Jiwang only needed their ears to see what was happening in the Orthodox Academy. The fountain dimmed. A tall figure obscured the sky. Shang Xingzhou did not give Chen Chongqing any chance to catch his breath. Several dozen zhang away, Wang Jitze and Tang 36 also appeared on the grass. Yuren was probably still in the 100 Herb Garden. Su Yorong appeared on the other side of the forest, her pure white wings faintly flapping. And where was the little black dragon? I'm very curious. Wang Jitze watched as Chen Chongqing stood up from the fountain and asked, "Could there be another sword here? Then where could it be hidden?" The sacred lion statue was very majestic and the fountain was very large, but the pool was very shallow. The teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy would often pass by, so it was very difficult for them not to notice the swords in the pool. Tang 36 said nothing, but Chen Chongqing used his actions to answer. He stood on tiptoe and thrust his hand into the lion's mouth. With a spray of water, he took out a sword. Su Yorong thought of something at this sight and felt rather disgusted. She covered her mouth. Wang Jitze sighed. This is also possible? Tang 36 arched his brows. Why not? Wang Jitze sighed. I originally thought that it was just that sword. Tang 36 replied. Wrong, I've hidden many swords here. Wang Jitze asked, just how many swords are there? They're everywhere. Tang 36 spread out his arms and closed his eyes, extremely intoxicated. As long as he's in the Orthodox Academy, he won't lose. The fountain suddenly broke and the lion's tail was severed. The cut was extremely smooth. Shang Xingzhou's and Chen Chongqing's swords clashed once more. Thunder boomed once more. But this time it lasted for a very long time and never stopped. The Orthodox Academy was filled with the cries of swords, occasionally accompanied by terrifying explosions. Master and disciple were nowhere to be seen. From time to time, swords would fly out of the forest or from their hiding places, stabbing into the grass or the broken walls, faintly vibrating. In this period of time, Chen Chongqing had found countless more swords, only to be sent flying by Shang Xingzhou. Suddenly, the cries of swords stopped. The Orthodox Academy became abnormally quiet. The quietest place was a building on the west side. From the style of the building, it was probably a hall for preaching the Tao, but for some reason, the walls were painted a vermilion, making them particularly conspicuous. 2 rows of maple trees had been planted around the building. Perhaps because of the array, no matter what season it was, they would always rustle with red. His blue Taoist robe was densely covered in holes that still contained remnants of sword intent. Blood constantly seeped out of them, making for a rather fiendish sight. Shang Xingzhou had suffered many injuries. Chen Chongqing's injuries were even worse. His face was pale, his body covered in blood, and his hands hanging by his side were trembling. "Do you still have any swords?" Shang Xingzhou asked. Chen Chongqing took a dagger from a flower pot at his side and said, "This is the last one. Guess what this building is called?" To be continued. Chapter 71. Before the Mausoleum of Books, they had not seen each other for several years. After that, they were like strangers, even enemies. However, they were still master and disciple. They had lived together in Xining Village's old temple for 10-some years, so they understood each other to the extreme. Just from the slightest movement, even the change in their eyes, they knew what the other was thinking. This was what was called feeling. Shang Xingzhou could feel Chen Chongqing's emotions when he pulled out the sword from the flower pot, which was why he asked that question. But after getting Chen Chongqing's confirmation, he didn't relax, nor did he feel proud, but asked another question. "Do you know what this place is?" Chen Chongqing was the principal of the Tradition Academy. He had lived here for many years, but he really didn't know what these red buildings were. The Tradition Academy was too big. These years, the place where he studied and lived was limited to the forest near the royal city and the vicinity of the mountain. It wasn't even 1/10 of the size of the Tradition Academy. Shang Xingzhou said, "This is the Maple Forest Pavilion. Those 2 rows of maple trees were moved here from the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education." Chen Chongqing thought to himself, no wonder he looks so familiar. Mei Lisha is my friend. Shang Xingzhou looked at his face and said with mixed emotions, "He has always admired you. I didn't understand it, but now I'm starting to understand." Hearing these words, Chen Chongqing didn't know if he should feel proud or gratified, or if he should let the bitterness in his heart freely spread. He could only remain silent. At a time like this, what was the point of saying such words? Perhaps it was precisely because Shang Xingzhou had confirmed that Chen Chongqing's swords were about to be used up, and thought of Chen Chongqing's defeat or even death, that he was feeling sentimental? But what was so important about the arrival of this Maple Forest Pavilion? Shang Xingzhou turned to look out of the building and said, "The final battle that year took place here. That year was more than 20 years ago, the night of the bloody incident of the Orthodox Academy. The Maple Forest Pavilion was so eye-catching. Perhaps it was because it had been stained with too much blood that night. That night, many people died here, many young people. They were as good as you, maybe even better than you." Shang Xingzhou withdrew his gaze and looked at Chen Chongqing, saying, "I've seen too many deaths in my life. I really don't care anymore, so don't expect me to be soft-hearted." The meaning of this sentence was very clear. If Chen Chongqing still didn't admit defeat, he wouldn't be afraid of personally killing Chen Chongqing with his sword. Chen Chongqing didn't admit defeat. He didn't even say anything, remaining silent. He raised his right hand and held the dagger horizontally in front of him. The mud gradually fell, and the cold light gradually intensified. Shang Xingzhou understood his choice and walked towards him. A clear footprint appeared on the floor. Each footprint glowed and then burst into flames. After the clouds dispersed, in the blue sky, the sun was incomparably bright, shining upon the Orthodox Academy. The Maple Forest Pavilion shone with a dazzling light, as if it was really burning. The maple trees outside swayed with the wind like tongues of fire. This was a fire formed from the burning of countless years of thick blood. It emitted a faint charred smell and gave off a heroic and awe-inspiring feeling. The blood and fire illuminated Shang Xingzhou's figure, making him look abnormally tall, like a demonic god. This was his life, the lives of Wang Jitze, the Tang Old Master, and the others. They would not give up their ideals and perseverance for anything. There was a clear whistle. A strong gale blew in the Maple Forest Pavilion. The maple tree swayed even more violently, as if tongues of fire were spitting out, wanting to burn the heavens. Shang Xingzhou gripped his dagger with both hands and slashed down, bringing with it a stream of blood and fire. The blood and fire were bright and dazzling, but his figure was gloomy and cold. The contrast between the two was particularly striking. With a boom, the blood and fire exploded into countless sparks that danced throughout the maple forest pavilion, igniting the floor and pillars. The dagger flew through the window. Chen Chongqing retreated 10 some steps and vomited blood. Shang Xingzhou raised his sword and once more walked towards him. No panic could be seen on Chen Chongqing's face. He said to Shang Xingzhou, "Concede, master." From the very beginning, he had said these words. In the lake, in front of Tibet, and in many other places, he would pick up a sword and say these words. And then, those swords would be cut down by Shang Xingzhou. Now, even his last sword had disappeared, but he was still saying these words. Shang Xingzhou did not show any derision on his face, nor was he confused. It seemed that he knew where Chen Chongqing's confidence came from. Chen Chongqing raised his right hand. There was nothing there except air and fire. Could he really make a sword out of the air? Not far away, the sound of air being cut could be heard. Swish! A cold light pierced through the window and then vanished. The dagger returned to Chen Chongqing's hand. Soon after, countless sounds of air being cut could be heard from various parts of the Orthodox Academy. These sounds were extremely sharp, naturally giving off a sharp feeling. The sounds grew more and more frequent, like a torrential rain, but even more like a torrential rain of arrows. Countless sword glows lit up from the bottom of the plum tree, in the tree, and in the water. The old plum tree had been neatly cut, looking like an incense burner that had been burning for 3 days and 3 nights. 10 holes appeared on the severed ancient tree, truly like a flute used by a god. Countless ripples appeared in the lake, like several hundred fat carps struggling to swim up from the rotting mud. Those swords that Tang 36 had hidden in the Orthodox Academy. Those swords that Chen Chongqing had found. Those swords that Shang Xingzhou had struck down. Flying through the air. Flying towards the maple forest pavilion. Several dozen swords arrived at Chen Chongqing's side. Shang Xingzhou looked at him and said, "Not enough." Chen Chongqing's finger lightly tapped the dagger. A crisp sword cry scattered in all directions, carrying with it several dozen cold and extremely pure sword intents. With a light crack, Shang Xingzhou's Taoist bun was severed. For that seemingly ordinary ebony bun to be severed at this moment was definitely not ordinary. Countless cold glows surged out from within, like great rivers, exuding a feeling of excitement. Fierce winds blew, chopping the swaying maple tree into pieces, madly dancing red shards flying in all directions. The eaves of the pavilion were cut into countless straight lines, the red walls and pillars cut into countless mottled lines. Even the flames that were about to be ignited by the sun also needed to be attached to an objective object. Without the skin, a tall building would collapse, so how could blood and fire be sustained? The tongues of flame burning towards the sky gradually faded, their color also gradually faded, until they ultimately vanished into nothingness. Sunlight spilled over the ruined maple forest pavilion. Several thousand swords quietly floated around Chen Chongqing. Cold and terrifying sword intents filled the world. These sword intents were faintly connected to an array, flowing and circulating, endlessly multiplying, giving off an impenetrable feeling. Chen Chongqing looked at Shang Xingzhou and asked, "Is it enough now?" The maple forest pavilion, from the nature of a hero, Brother Ma. I prepared this scene more than 2 years ago, not long after choosing Heaven's will began. I especially like it. To be continued. Chapter 72. Half of the maple forest pavilion had already collapsed, and there were broken walls and broken windows everywhere. As the sunlight fell, it was separated from the tall red maples by the thin clouds that were gradually drifting back. The dim light was refracted by thousands of swords and did not become bright. It was more like the reflection of water. Chen Chongqing loosened his grip and the short sword that had been hidden in the flower pot for many years flew away, merging with the rain of swords in the sky. He reached out and plucked a sword from the air, as if he was plucking a fruit from a fruit tree in autumn. This sword was also very short, but it was extremely bright and incomparably sharp. It was precisely stainless. The wooden bun had been broken into two, and no one knew where it had fallen. The vault sheath landed at Shang Xingzhou's feet. This scabbard, named vault sheath, was an important treasure of Li Palace. After Chen Chongqing left Xining village, he had always kept it by his side. At first, this might have just been a casual stroke of Shang Xingzhou's, but today, it had finally become an incredible hidden trick. At the beginning of the battle, he had taken the vault sheath from Chen Chongqing's hands. The vault sheath isolated Chen Chongqing's divine sense, preventing him from recalling those swords. He had fallen into a hopeless situation. It could even be said that he was in a dead end. But later on, he found many swords in the Orthodox Academy, and all of them had sword intents. The scabbard could isolate his divine sense, but for some reason, it could not completely isolate the sword intent. Sword intent was the meaning of sword. The meaning of those swords was to summon, to stand shoulder to shoulder, to undress, to be comrades. At this point, the scabbard could no longer stop all the swords from leaving, despite its name, because those sword intents were showing off their sharpness. The Prince of Xiang's eyes were a little red, perhaps because of the sawdust drifting out of the Orthodox Academy. Perhaps it was because he could see those sharp sword wills through the thick courtyard walls. He raised his sleeve to wipe his eyes, then suddenly turned around and walked out of 100 Blossom Street, causing quite a commotion. Wang Pe glanced at him but did not follow. It didn't take long for the Prince of Xiang to appear on the Bridge of Helplessness. Winter had already passed and all living things had come to life. Spring was about to arrive. The Luo River had already melted and was slowly flowing, carrying with it a few icy dregs. 2 streams of tears flowed down the Prince of Xiang's cheeks. His face was round and big, so the scene looked a little funny, but not sad. Standing beside him was a white-haired old man. His face was round and big, and he looked a little comical. Perhaps it could be said that he was extremely festive. The old man was called Chao Yunping. He was the nephew of the Elder of Heavenly Secrets, and was once one of the storms of the 8 directions. 100 some years ago, he was defeated by Su Li's sword. In his grief and indignation, he disregarded the advice of the Elder of Heavenly Secrets and the Tianhai Divine Empress, crippling all his techniques and starting from the beginning. In the end, he suffered a cultivation defect, a problem with his brain. In recent years, Chao Yunping rarely appeared in front of others. Very few people knew that Chen Chongqing had met him on his way to White Emperor City. He was originally invited by someone in power to make things difficult for Chen Chongqing, but in the end, he was persuaded by Chen Chongqing to prioritize the overall situation of the human race. Later on, he killed Mu Jiushi in the Western Sea. Yes, this expert of the divine domain had already recovered his cultivation and was even stronger than before. As for intelligence, no one knew whether he was really as innocent as a child, or whether he had learned to act innocent. But why had he appeared in the capital today, and why had he met with the Prince of Xiang by the Luo River? Could it be that the person who had invited him to make things difficult for Chen Chongqing had been the Prince of Xiang? Why are you crying? Chao Yunping looked at the Prince of Xiang and very seriously asked, "Because no one is willing to give you candy to eat?" Without waiting for the Prince of Xiang's reply, he quickly added, "Su Yorong only gave me 1 bag of candy, so I can't share it with you." These were 2 very simple sentences, seemingly childish and cute, perhaps even pitiful, but they had already revealed enough information. If these were the conditions for negotiation, then these were very clear. The Prince of Xiang used a handkerchief to wipe the tears from the corner of his eyes and sighed, "I'm sad because the venerable Taoist is about to lose. My days from now on will be very difficult." Chao Yunping froze at these words, and then he grinned and innocently said, "You swindler, how could that be possible?" Yes, there was no reason for Shang Xingzhou to lose to Chen Chongqing. The difference in cultivation levels between the two was too great. But in this battle between master and disciple, there had been a precondition from the very start. Shang Xingzhou had to suppress his cultivation below the divine domain. He alone possessed the South Stream Temple sword array. The current Chen Chongqing could be considered the strongest expert below the divine domain. Not even the Demon Lord or Qiushan Jun were a match for him. Even in the tens of thousands of years of history of cultivation, it would be very difficult to find someone as powerful as him before breaking into the divine domain. The Prince of Xiang glanced over the academy wall and began to cry. He had seen those sword intents and was truly rather disappointed. It seemed like Shang Xingzhou had no choice but to lose. The Maple Forest Pavilion was very quiet. The Orthodox Academy was very quiet. The wind blew over the lake and the maple forest, passing through the ruined Maple Forest Pavilion. It was cut to pieces by the swords in the sky and then gathered back together, giving off very complicated sounds. Some sounds were like sobs, some were like resentful howls. "I will not lose to you," Shang Xingzhou said to Chen Chongqing. "I taught you." This was his principle, his reason. "I will not lose to you." These words were actually saying that he could not lose to you. Shang Xingzhou took a step forward and said a single word. This word sounded very simple, just a single syllable. But when this word was heard, it revealed its true face, the incomparably complex undulations of its tone. In this extremely short period of time, it was as if there was an endless amount of information. This was not the language of humans, but the remnants of an ancient civilization, an intelligent world as magnificent and beautiful as the sea of stars. His blue Taoist robe danced in the wind, the cry of a dragon rising with it, resounding through the Orthodox Academy. Shang Xingzhou's eyes turned pale, making him seem like a ghost or a god. An unimaginably ancient qi swept toward Chen Chongqing and the rain of swords in the sky. Chen Chongqing stared into Shang Xingzhou's eyes and suddenly said a single word. This word was also a single syllable, but it was similarly strange and complex, simply incomprehensible and extremely remote. The faint cry of a dragon came from the sky once more shrouded in clouds, brimming with delight and gratification. Countless swords descended according to Chen Chongqing's will. Awe-inspiring sword intents and the cries of swords could be heard everywhere. Countless straight and deep sword slashes appeared in the sky. There was a light clap. The wind stopped. The world became incomparably quiet once more. The rain of swords was about to fall, suspended in the sky. Shang Xingzhou stood in front of Chen Chongqing, his entire body covered in blood. His right hand clutched Chen Chongqing's throat. With just the slightest bit of force, Chen Chongqing would die. At this moment, Wang Zhica's voice rang out. "You've lost. This illness has really been exhausting. Today, I wrote a chapter in a fit of craziness. Tomorrow, I might say I won't write it anymore. It's all right. After all, it's the most important chapters. I don't dare to be negligent. But I really don't have the energy to think about chapter names. But this is fine. It's simple and direct enough. To be continued." Chapter 73. Like usual? Then what? Seeing that the person talking was Chen Chongqing, Tang 36's expression suddenly became lively. He rolled his eyes and asked, "Just like before, you will directly curse at me?" Chen Chongqing thought about it and said, "When you get tired of cursing, you will fall asleep." Tang 36 looked at the seats of the Heavenly Academy students and students. After a moment of silence, he said in a low voice, "After all, some people treat me well." During the entrance exam of the Heavenly Academy, Chen Chongqing saw some scenes from afar and knew that the Vice Principal Zhuang cared a lot about him. Now that Tang 36 was looking at Vice Principal Zhuang, Chen Chongqing thought that there must be a story behind it. It was probably because of this person that Tang 36 behaved differently than usual. But, as a person, you should be yourself first. Tang 36 looked at the seats of the Heavenly Academy and thought about the storms hidden in the past few months. He thought about how he was targeted by his classmates. He thought about what happened to him 2 nights before the Ivy Festival. His lips curled up and showed a mysterious smile. If it was a normal day, Chen Chongqing wouldn't give any opinions to his choices, even if he was his only friend. Because of his personality, Chen Chongqing wouldn't give any opinions to his choices. But tonight, just like Tang 36 in the Heavenly Academy, he fell into the shameless trap of his opponent and barely escaped from the giant black dragon. A lot of things had changed. He looked at Tang 36 and didn't say anything, but his calm and sure eyes showed his support. You want me to apologize to those Southerners? Tang 36 looked at Zhuang Huanyu and said, "This is too boring. Your performance is also too boring." Sounds of astonishment rang out in the hall. Zhuang Huanyu was ranked 10th on the honor roll of Green Cloud. He was the leader of the young elites in the Ivy League. He was as famous as the 7 rules of heaven in the South. Although his previous performance made people feel uncomfortable and even shameful, he was still the representative of the Heavenly Academy. Tang 36, as a student of the Heavenly Academy, pointed out his mistakes was a bit disrespectful. Because it's boring, so it's not fun. Since it's not fun, then why am I still playing here? Don't try to use our relationship as classmates to restrict me. Don't use your identity as a teacher to control me. Don't use your identity as a senior to shut me up. Because I have decided to quit the school. Tang 36 looked at his former classmates and teachers and said calmly, "I have decided to leave the Heavenly Academy." Even though the people in the hall had experienced too many shocks tonight, they were still in an uproar when they heard his words. The Heavenly Academy was the continent's #1 academy, and it had trained countless peerless cultivators. The current pope came from this academy, and many of the first-place winners of the first banner also came from this academy. Even though in recent years, the young students of the Heavenly Academy had been stolen by the 7 laws from the Southern Divine Kingdom, and the Zhou dynasty had a peerless genius like Su Yurong, in the end, the Heavenly Academy was still the Heavenly Academy. No one dared to question the status of this academy. Everyone took the test to enter the Heavenly Academy as an honor. Many people bitterly searched just to step into the Heavenly Academy's gate, but tonight, there was someone who took the initiative to leave the Heavenly Academy. The uproar in the hall continued. The expressions of the teachers and students of the academy were ugly to the extreme, and Vice Principal Zhuang's face was a bit pale. The surprising thing was that the Heavenly Academy's principal, Mao Qiuyu, didn't have any reaction. On the contrary, the old man's expression was a bit relieved, as if everything was within his expectations. "I know a lot of people will ask me why." Tang 36 looked at the crowd and said emotionlessly, "The Heavenly Academy has the best teachers, the best students, and I have to admit that I have been taken care of a lot. Even if I suffered a bit compared to these, it doesn't seem to be enough for me to make the decision to leave the academy. But just like what I said, the current Heavenly Academy is really boring. Boring, it's not fun. If it's not fun, why should I continue to play here?" This was something he had said before, and many people recalled it. Just because I said I wanted to destroy Tian Haiye, the teachers and seniors in the academy forbade me from participating in the Ivy Festival. Just because I wanted to challenge Zhuang Huanyu, someone trapped me with a seal for 1 night. Don't talk to me about the big picture. In the past, when did the Heavenly Academy need to care about other people's big picture? What about the Heavenly Academy now? Even the Tian Hai family is scared. What is going on? This is not the Heavenly Academy that I have read about in the book. This Heavenly Academy is so boring, so boring. Tang 36 looked at the teachers and students of the Heavenly Academy and said. His words were frivolous, but his expression was extremely serious because these were his true words before he left. These words caused an even greater uproar in the hall, because this youth from Wenshui had mentioned the Tianhai clan. There was a lot of content in these words, but people only heard about the Tian Hai family. Even the Tian Hai family is scared. He actually used the word, even. He actually thought that the Tian Hai family shouldn't be scared. Prince Chen Lu slightly lowered his head. 2 wine cups appeared on the table in front of him. The wine in the cups reflected the light from the luminous pearls. It was very beautiful, and he seemed to be lost in thought. Mou looked at Tang 36 indifferently. Her right hand lightly held the teacup, and the tea in the cup didn't make a single ripple. Tian Hai was the surname of the Divine Queen. The Tian Hai family was the family of the Divine Queen's mother. After the cruel war 10 years ago, the Tian Hai family had already replaced the Chen family and became one of the most honorable surnames on this continent, just like the Bai family in the West. In terms of power, the Tian Hai family was undoubtedly the number 1 in the world. In the current Zhou dynasty, even the Li Palace where the Pope lived would treat the Tian Hai family gently. Even if countless people secretly hated the Tian Hai family, no one dared to say such words in public. Who could be like Tang 36 and criticize the Tian Hai family in front of so many people? People looked at Tang 36 with a complicated expression. Some admired him, some pitied him, but of course, most of them looked at him like he was an idiot. Did this young man get addicted to slapping faces tonight? He didn't even let the Tian Hai family go? Tang 36 didn't seem to feel these gazes, and he didn't even think about what kind of danger was hidden in his words. He looked at Zhuang Huanyu coldly and said, "I know you had a hard time when you were young, but that's not a reason for you to blame anyone. Don't always think that everyone in this world wronged you. You act like you're fine in front of others, but in your heart, you're always blaming yourself. You're already in the top 10 of the honor roll of Green Clouds, but you still feel that fate is unfair. Otherwise, if you could be as strong as Qiu Shanjun, who are you showing your resentment to? I can't stand and hate people like you the most. Right now, there are too many students like you in the Heavenly Academy, so it's becoming more and more like a theater. All you do is babble and sing soft songs. Of course it's boring." The hall gradually quieted down. People looked at the seats of the Heavenly Academy and at Zhuang Huanyu. Zhuang Huanyu was silent for a long time. His expression gradually calmed down. He looked at Tang 36 and said, "I did lose my composure before. No matter what you did wrong, no matter if you care about the existence of the Heavenly Academy or not, it's not my place to criticize you. Even though what you said is ugly, it's still reasonable. But have you ever thought about why, after you entered the Heavenly Academy, the teachers and us don't like you? Why do you feel that they are pushing you away in the dark? Pride? No, the students of the Heavenly Academy should be proud. You are a descendant of the one Shui Tang family. You were born with a golden spoon in your mouth. You were taken care of by important people when you entered the academy. You can skip classes, you can disobey the rules of the academy, but you still got what you deserve. What about the other students? They have to study hard to get something, so they naturally look down on people like you who only know how to take shortcuts." At this moment, most of the people sitting on the seats in the hall were students from normal families. The dozens of young students from the Southern ambassadors were mostly poor. The 3 young people from the 7 Laws of God listened to Zhuang Huanyu's words, and Go Han Shi, who was born in a poor family, also seemed to be thinking about something. Vice Principal Zhuang's face was very ugly because he knew that the important person who took care of Tang 36 was him. "Maybe what you said is reasonable. The Heavenly Academy has its rules and has a tradition that has been passed down for thousands of years. Maybe the teachers and you all think that only those who go through hardship can be successful, but my family has a lot of money. What can I do? Do I have to pretend to be poor? Or do I have to ask my grandfather to give away all of his wealth? Then the Divine Queen would probably be very happy." Tang 36 shook his head and said, "You have your reasons, I have my habits, and the Heavenly Academy has its rules. Tonight we won't talk about who is right or wrong, but since we are not suitable for each other, then this matter will never become fun. So, I will leave the Heavenly Academy. Shut up! Vice Principal Zhuang yelled with an ugly face. When he was young, he was indebted to the one Shui Tang family, and there were many old stories between him and the Tang family. Since he promised the elders of the Tang family to take care of Tang 36's life in the capital, how could he just watch Tang 36 mess around? Your father gave you to me. Do you really think I don't dare to discipline you? Tang 36 looked at him and thought for a while. He scratched his head and said, Uncle Zhuang, you always say that my father asked you to take care of me. Actually, on the way to the capital, I already opened that letter and read it. I know that the person who asked you to take care of me is my mother, so don't use that sentence to pressure me. Vice Principal Zhuang's finger trembled in anger and said, You bastard, how could you open the letter? Open the letter! For some reason, Zhuang Huanyu's face turned pale when he heard this. Tang 36 said, Anyways, I will leave the Heavenly Academy tonight. Vice Principal Zhuang said bitterly, Kid, why are you so disobedient? The preparatory course is over and you want to leave the school. What about the great trial next year? Tang 36 paused and realized that this was indeed a problem. This is not a problem. Chun Chongxing smiled and said, Come to my place. Tang 36 raised his eyebrows and said, Come to your place? Chun Chongxing said, The students of the Tradition Academy also have the right to directly participate in the great trial. He would never make a mistake about this rule. When he first came to the capital, he didn't want to take the preparatory course and directly participate in the great trial next year. That's why he tried so hard to get into the 6 Ivies. But he didn't expect that fate would make him the first freshman of the Tradition Academy in many years. Tang 36's eyebrows raised even higher as if he found something very interesting and fun. How many people do you have now? 3. Chun Chongxing pointed at himself and Luo Luo and said, There is another one who stayed in the Tradition Academy tonight. You have seen him before. Tang 36 was silent for a while and then laughed and said, Count me in. Chun Chongxing thought for a while and said, Then we have 4 people. Chun Chongxing's stamp collecting activity continues. The Tradition Academy has 4 people. Today there is only 1 chapter. Chapter 74. There will definitely be more typos and mistakes in the next few days, as I still don't have the energy to keep up and have even less time to fix them. But the plot is wonderful. The swords fell like rain, aimed at the master and disciple on the ruins. The wind stopped, the stones stopped rolling, and there was naturally no sound, only silence. The people in 100 Flowers Lane noticed this silence, and knew that something major had occurred. Life and death were naturally the truly important matters. In the Tradition Academy, that shocking killing intent that rose to the heavens intimidated everyone's mind. Suddenly, the sound of a zither rang out, snapping countless strings. Crossbow bolts were randomly fired in front of the Orthodox Academy, sacred light illuminating the gloomy sky. Whistles through the air and grunts of injured arrows could be heard from time to time. When the chaotic situation was once more brought under control, several pools of blood could be seen in the lane. Wang Pa had disappeared. Linghai Jiwang's complexion was abnormally pale, as he was worried that something had happened to the Pope. If something had not happened in the Orthodox Academy, if the Pope had not been in danger, why would Wang Pa forcefully strike at such a tense moment and then charge into the academy? A bitterly cold blade intent appeared in front of the maple forest pavilion. A breeze ruffled the red maples as Wang Pa appeared in front of the ruins. As he saw the scene and sensed the Taoist qi and sword intents lingering in the air, he very quickly confirmed the general situation. How could a genius of a generation be so unbearable? Wang Po's words were as sharp as a blade. The cold winds stirred up by the blade intent were instantly severed. Tang 36 sighed, Yes, it's too shameful. He spoke with great sincerity, giving off the feeling that he was completely concerned about Shang Xingzhou's reputation. Su Yorong said nothing. At some point, she had already walked up behind Chen Chongqing. She was extremely close, only a few steps away. This was a very risky course of action. It was impossible to see the expression on her face, as her head was lowered. One could only see her trembling eyelashes. Her eyelashes shone brilliantly in the light, like the leaves of a ginkgo tree in autumn. The light came from her eyes, from the blazing essence blood of the phoenix. She was ready to strike at any moment, or save Chen Chongqing, or perish together with Shang Xingzhou. The clouds in the sky fled in all directions. As the mountainous body of the dragon got closer and closer to the ground, the shadow grew heavier and heavier. But in the next moment the shadow stopped growing, because she could clearly see the scene and feel fear. And where was Yuren? Wang Po was right, and Tang 36 was speaking from the bottom of his heart. With Shang Xingzhou's status, it was indeed inexcusable for him to go back on his word. What's more, he was Chen Chongqing's master, so this would be even more embarrassing. Wang Jitsa had been invited to the capital by him, but he would not support him. He said, "If you make a move, you know what I will do next." Shang Xingzhou did not necessarily fear Wang Jitsa, even if he might join hands with Wang Po. The Prince of Xiang and the princes of the Chen clan would support him, as would the experts of the court and the military. This war was worth fighting, even if it was a little risky. He really wanted to go back on his word and kill Chen Chongqing. When Wang Jitsa said that he had lost, he closed his eyes and saw many futures. Those were the different futures he would have after making different choices. One of them seemed to be the most beautiful, so he ran it over 5 times, and succeeded in repeating the perfect process 4 times. That future also began with his choice. His fingers would tighten slightly. Chen Chongqing's head would fall to the ground like a ripe fruit and then be smashed into pulp. What followed would be an extremely dangerous battle. He might lose, he might win, but his life would not be in danger. Regardless of victory or defeat, at the most desperate moment of the battle, he would voluntarily give up, admit his crimes to the young emperor, and ask for seclusion in Luoyang. In the following years, the Li Palace would be masterless and internal strife would inevitably arise. Coupled with external pressure, he would be able to very easily wrest back the authority of the orthodoxy. At some point in time, he would have Prince Chen Lu die. In another few years, the Prince of Zhongshan would rebel and lead the cavalry of Blue Pass south. At that time, he would return from Luoyang. If he did not return, the Prince of Zhongshan would assuredly lose, but he had to seize this chance to clearly discuss with the young emperor about the matters of the past and cast those matters of the past to the back of his mind. Only in this way could master and disciple be of one mind, could the entire world submit to them. In another few years, the world would be unified, the people would be united, the human race would prosper, and it would be the day of the Northern Expedition. 1,000,000 mighty soldiers would besiege the city. Which city was the city? Of course, Xuelao City. This was the result Shang Xingzhou's calculations. This was that incomparably beautiful future. For this future, he was willing to give up everything, sacrifice everything. Even if this will go down in infamy for 10,000 years? Wang Jitsa asked. For the last several centuries, I have always remained behind the curtain. If not for Tianhai's pressure, perhaps I would never have walked onto the stage today. Shang Xingzhou said, I don't even care about leaving my name in the annals of history, so why would I care about leaving behind a bad reputation or a good one? Wang Jitsa said nothing more, because he knew that Shang Xingzhou truly was this sort of person. Wang Po also said nothing, his right hand tightly gripping the hilt of his blade. Shang Xingzhou's killing intent towards Chen Chongqing was so real. His hand was on Chen Chongqing's throat. Who could stop him? The wall behind the maple forest pavilion suddenly collapsed. As the dust settled, Yuren's figure was revealed. Shang Xingzhou calmly gazed at him. Yuren very slowly shook his head, his expression extremely solemn. Shang Xingzhou understood his meaning. Yuren was saying to him, "Your calculations cannot be established. If you kill junior brother, I will never forgive you." Without master and disciple being of one mind, the world would naturally not submit to them, and there would be no final scene. Shang Xingzhou was not affected in the slightest, because he was very confident. Shang Xingzhou believed that as long as he had enough time, Yuren would eventually understand his painstaking efforts. But why hadn't he done anything yet? Or perhaps it was because one person had been too quiet. That person was about to die. Dying from shamelessness. He had every reason to be angry. He could curse and swear. He could speak passionately. He could spit on Shang Xingzhou's face. But he did nothing. When Shang Xingzhou was talking to Wang Jitze and the others, he just quietly watched him like he was enjoying a play. An arm's length away. Everyone felt that Shang Xingzhou would kill him, so why was he so calm? Shang Xingzhou was quiet for a while, then asked, "You thought of this beforehand?" "I understand Sir very well. If the world believes that Sir is wrong, Sir will definitely believe that the problem lies with the world, not you," Chen Chongqing said. "How could a person like Sir, who is always correct, admit to his own failure?" Shang Xingzhou asked, "Then why did you arrange for today's match?" If no matter the result of this match, Shang Xingzhou would not abide by their previous agreement, then what was the point? If Chen Chongqing had calculated this beforehand, why would he have expended so much energy to force Shang Xingzhou to agree to his demands, allowing the situation to develop to this point? Of course it's very meaningful, because it will help Sir clearly see yourself. Chen Chongqing looked at Shang Xingzhou and said, "Sir, look at how ugly you are right now, how ugly you are." His eyes were clean and bright, like a mirror reflecting a face. It was a rather old face, covered in blood and dirt, and the pride and wildness of self-hypnosis. Shang Xingzhou found this face very unfamiliar. To be continued. Chapter 75. Shang Xingzhou knew that it was his own face, but he still found it very unfamiliar, because it was very different from the face he usually saw in the mirror. No one knew what sort of person Shang Xingzhou was. Probably only Yuren knew. Neither the Tang Old Master, Yin, nor Chen Chongqing understood him very well. To describe him in one word, he was not close. Shang Xingzhou was not close to his junior brother, not close to his old friends, and not close to his disciples. He was not close to the entire world, whether actively or passively, but he wanted to bring the world forward. Everyone said that Black Robe was the most mysterious person in the world, but in those first few centuries, he had been even more mysterious. He was more patient than Black Robe, more inconspicuous, and even more undemanding. If he wanted to, his portrait would definitely have had the right to be hung in the Lingyan Pavilion, and it would have been placed at the very front. But he still chose to remain in the darkness, not seeing the sun and not interacting with others. In those centuries, he played all sorts of roles and had countless faces. Perhaps it was precisely for this reason that he would often look in the mirror. Only then could he confirm who he was today. Gradually, he got used to talking to his reflection in the mirror, even when he no longer needed to play any other role. He had always kept the clear sky mirror at his side, and only this year had Su Yorong bring it to White Emperor City, where it had shattered in that battle. He was more familiar with his own face than anyone else, so he felt it was very unfamiliar now. His face was rather haggard, lacking its usual heroic spirit, making it seem old. Most importantly, his eyes were no longer as calm as they used to be. Between his raised brows and feigned indifference, the tyrannical aura of a king could be seen, making him seem rather foolish. It was just like that youngest prince back then, his brows twisted in the 100-herb garden as he clamored about something. In the end, he was still shot to death by arrows. When King Chu died, his face was also covered in blood and grime. Where did I go next? Yes, I went to the imperial palace and conveyed His Majesty's will to Emperor Taizu. Taizu seemed fat and stupid, but he was actually extremely intelligent. How had he seen through my killing intent? His Majesty was truly too benevolent. He should have killed Wang Jitsa that night, so why spared his life? Without him, could the demons still not be defeated? It was truly inexplicable. With Chen Xuanba's astonishing talent and King Chu's great talent and bold vision, didn't His Majesty endure the pain of killing them? Why pity a scholar? Shang Xingzhou's thoughts drifted back from the past. His gaze also retracted from the distance and fell upon Chen Chongqing's face. There was also blood on Chen Chongqing's face, but for some reason, it still seemed very clean. Moreover, this face was very calm, and there was no sign of fear on it. Shang Xingzhou was a little angry. Chen Chongqing's words made him very uncomfortable. Chen Chongqing's calmness was even more unacceptable to him. He asked, "Are you really not afraid of death?" Chen Chongqing said, "Master, you should know better than anyone how afraid I am of death." When he was 10 years old, after Shang Xingzhou said those words to him, he was sad for a long time. There were many nights when he cried under the covers. It was Yuren who was patting him on the back and coaxing him through the blanket. But how could Shang Xingzhou, who was in the room next to the wall, not know? But the more I think about it, the more afraid I become numb to it. Chen Chongqing continued, "Now that I think about it, I truly must thank Sir for arranging this life for me." Shang Xingzhou said, "At that time, you were convinced that you wouldn't live past the age of 20. Every day you faced death, so it was naturally easy for you to overcome your fear. Now that you've defied the heavens and changed your fate, you can roam freely in this world for 1,000 years, and you even have a high chance of seeing great freedom. Why are you still not afraid?" I also don't know if I'm truly not afraid or if it's something else. Probably only when death truly approaches will I understand my own heart. Chen Chongqing said, "I will help Sir clearly see yourself, and Sir can help me clearly see myself." Others were hell. Death was a bright mirror. One could straighten one's clothes. One could see one's heart. Time slowly passed. The maple trees were quiet. Shang Xingzhou still had not moved. "Let go," Wang Jitsa said. Since he wasn't going to move, why not let go? There were two meanings in letting go. Letting go of Chen Chongqing's neck. Letting go of this world. Shang Xingzhou said nothing, nor did he move. "Does Sir feel that letting go like this is very shameful?" Tang 36 suddenly laughed, then forcefully slapped the right side of his face. The slap was very clear and resounding. Tang 36's right side of his face reddened at a speed visible to the naked eye. He looked at Shang Xingzhou and said very seriously, "Sir, what does face matter?" Shang Xingzhou still said nothing. In the view of some people, Tang 36's actions were only to disturb Shang Xingzhou's mind, essentially speaking nonsense. Chen Chongqing did not think so. He knew that this was the true problem. He had just said that someone like Shang Xingzhou, who was always right, would never admit defeat. This fact made him feel rather tired, or perhaps bored. He said to Shang Xingzhou, "Why can't Sir learn to admit defeat? I haven't lost, so why should I admit defeat? Don't forget, in these 1,000 years, I've always been the winner." Shang Xingzhou proudly said, "Even if I once underestimated Tianhai and made a mistake, in the end, I still won." Chen Chongqing was silent for a while, then asked, "If you're not willing to admit defeat, then what if you admit your mistake?" It was very quiet. Everyone's gazes fell on him. "If Sir insists on not admitting defeat, then can you admit your mistake?" Chen Chongqing very seriously asked Shang Xingzhou. Shang Xingzhou's expression froze. 3 years ago in the Orthodox Academy, it was also snowing that night. At the time, I told Sir that you were wrong between us. Chen Chongqing asked, "Since you were wrong, why don't you admit your mistake?" Not talking about victory and defeat, but about right and wrong. Just who was right and who was wrong. If he didn't admit defeat, would he admit his mistake? Shang Xingzhou said nothing. Chen Chongqing looked at him and asked, Master, is it so difficult for you to admit your mistake? Shang Xingzhou calmly looked at him and slowly loosened his grip. No one stepped forward because the two were still very close. They only needed to stretch out their hands to touch each other. Chen Chongqing then said a few words. In the mausoleum of books, I told Sir that perhaps only at the final moment would you discover what you truly want. Just now was the final moment. Sir asked me why I arranged this match, and this is the answer. I want to ask Sir to face yourself. Perhaps it's rather ugly, but it's true. You don't want to kill me, you've never wanted to kill me, because you know you're wrong. Since 20 years ago, everything you've done regarding me has been wrong. At the very beginning, this part was even more intense. Chen Chongqing wanted to be like Ma Jingtao, incessantly yelling at Shang Xingzhou, Kill me! If you have the ability, kill me! Saliva flew everywhere. After careful thought, I changed it to this because I think it's very beautiful this way. The title of the chapter was intentional. It's not wrong. To be continued. Chapter 76. I recommend to everyone Lord Black Sky Demon God's new work. The title of the book is The Infected, a connection between the creation era/BK/KH/141404448. The title of the chapter is from Qin Shi Huang's theme song, The Earth is Beneath My Feet. In the last few days, the Southern diplomatic mission had used the Grand Examination as an excuse to come north. Su Yorong had brought South Stream Temple with her in a display of force. The capital and Luoyang were in turmoil. The imperial court and the plains were filled with thunderbolts. Chen Chongqing had never expressed his stance, quietly sitting in his stone room to comprehend the sword. Only today did he suddenly exert his strength, using this momentum to force Shang Xingzhou to agree to a battle with him. This entire process had truly been exhausting. Of course, he wanted to win this battle, but more importantly, the battle itself was the most important thing. He wanted to use this battle to force Shang Xingzhou to the edge of a cliff, force him into the most extreme of situations. He wanted Shang Xingzhou to truly feel the danger of defeat, to feel strange gazes, to feel the perplexed prospect of everything turning to nothing. Only in this way could Shang Xingzhou face himself, see the small figure hidden beneath his blue Taoist robe, see his heart that he had never seen. Just what was Shang Xingzhou thinking? Just how did he view everything related to Chen Chongqing? Chen Chongqing's words were his opinion of Shang Xingzhou. You are not willing to admit your wrongs, but you already knew that you were wrong. So in these last few years, you have never tried to do it yourself, only had the people of the Tianhai clan and the people of the great western continent kill me. This is because you simply do not want to kill me, even though you yourself are not aware of this fact. This view was actually somewhat reasonable. With Shang Xingzhou's cultivation level, his will that was like an old pine tree, even if the Pope had left behind many restrictions before his death, even if Chen Chongqing had many helpers and was extremely careful, if he truly wanted to kill Chen Chongqing, how could he have spent so many years without any results? The White Tiger Divine General's actions were even more of a joke. This was the truth that Chen Chongqing wanted Shang Xingzhou to see, his true intentions. Shang Xingzhou silently looked at Chen Chongqing, his eyes very cold. It was like he was not looking at a real person, a living being, but a few weeds in a pot, a sour fruit. Were Chen Chongqing's words true? In those years in Xining Village's old temple, it was Yuren who had raised Chen Chongqing with porridge and fish, and it was also Yuren who had educated Chen Chongqing. Shang Xingzhou wasn't close to Chen Chongqing and rarely disciplined him. So it wasn't because he didn't have feelings for Chen Chongqing, but because he was afraid of having feelings? These years, the entire world knew that he didn't like Chen Chongqing, but they didn't understand why. So those mockery, contempt, and disdain weren't real. He just wanted to keep his distance so that he could harden his heart? But in the end, Chen Chongqing still became that shadow on his Tao heart. How could he erase that shadow? How could he fill it up? He couldn't kill Chen Chongqing either, because those things had already happened. Or, it was just as Chen Chongqing said. Apologize? Several gazes landed on Shang Xingzhou's face. Shang Xingzhou looked at Chen Chongqing and laughed. His smile was filled with undisguised mockery. You think too much. Saying this, he turned and walked out of the Orthodox Academy. His green Taoist robe was soaked with blood, looking like a black lotus that was slowly swaying in the wind. Looking at the fading figure, Chen Chongqing remained silent and didn't say anything. Until the end, no one admitted defeat, but everyone knew who had won and who had lost. He had defeated his master, the most powerful person in the world. He had not only obtained victory in this battle, but also victory in this spiritual struggle between master and disciple. No matter how one looked at it, this was an extraordinary matter, the glory of a king. Logically speaking, the ruins of the Maple Forest Pavilion, no, the entire Orthodox Academy should be brimming with a cheerful air. But there was none, because Chen Chongqing maintained his silence, tightly pursing his lips, so tightly that they appeared rather pale. The person closest to him was Su Yorong. Seeing his silence, the joy in Su Yorong's eyes gradually faded, replaced by a very faint pity. I never imagined that you were actually so good at talking. She smiled as she spoke, wanting to comfort his current mood. Today, Chen Chongqing had said many things to Shang Xingzhou, and under the agitation of his emotions, his words seemed rather sharp. That's because you normally don't talk much with him, or else you would know that he's most skilled at rebuking people. Tang 36's eyebrows danced as he spoke. He had no intention of mocking Chen Chongqing, and his face was filled with pride. He then turned his head and impatiently asked, "Do you want me to invite you?" Tang 36 did not understand his meaning. Tang 36 said, "The fight is already over, so what are you still standing there for? Hurry up and leave. I don't plan on inviting you to a meal." He was the superintendent of the Orthodox Academy, so he naturally had the right to welcome or expel a guest. The problem was that these two words of his were directed at Wang Jitsa. Not even Emperor Taizong or the Tianhai Divine Empress would use such an impatient tone with Wang Jitsa. And no one would use the word pestle with Wang Jitsa. Wang Jitsa shook his head, then turned and walked out of the Orthodox Academy. "Who are you putting on that calm and relaxed appearance for? Didn't you still lose?" Tang 36 spat on the ground. Wang Po walked up to Chen Chongqing and examined his face. After confirming that there was nothing wrong, he bid farewell. From start to finish, there had been no conversation, no thank. He was just this indifferent. That year in Xuanyang City, last year in Wenshui City, and this year in the capital, it had all been like this. Chen Chongqing turned to Su Yorong and said, "I won." Su Yorong looked at him with an admiring gaze and said, "Very impressive." Chen Chongqing was quiet for a while, then said, "I didn't cry." Su Yorong wiped the dust from his face and said with some heartache, "This is also very extraordinary." Chen Chongqing gazed into the distance. The academy wall over there had already collapsed. The bright yellow imperial robe was extremely striking in the gloomy weather. Yuren was standing there. 100 Flowers Lane was deathly still. The crowd had been so shocked by the final result that they couldn't speak. No one left, partly because they were too shocked, and partly because the gate of the Orthodox Academy was still closed. The Emperor and the Pope were currently talking inside. After this battle, no one could stop this pair of senior and junior brothers from meeting. But almost an hour had passed. Just what were they talking about? The heavy gate of the Orthodox Academy slowly opened. Chen Chongqing walked out. His dagger was tied. His hair was somewhat messy. His body was covered in dust and blood. His eyes were somewhat red. He seemed very tired, even in a sorry state. But no one dared to think so. Su Yorong walked on his left. Tang 36 was behind him. Linghai Jiwang solemnly bowed. Paying respects to His Holiness the Pope. The priests of the Li Palace all prostrated and bowed. At first, it was rather sparse, but it gradually became more concentrated and orderly. More and more people prostrated on the ground. There were orthodoxy cavalry and black-armored cavalry. The ministers of the court also prostrated. The Tensum princes silently looked at each other, but in the end, they still slowly prostrated. Chen Chongqing walked out of the lane. One by one, the crowd prostrated. Like a tide. Drowning the capital. Reaching the entire continent. To be continued. Chapter 77. Many thanks to Reader 12 of the bookstore, a string of asterisks 29 for the reminder. As for the imperial design or the imperial design, I wrote it completely incorrectly in this volume. I very sincerely apologize. In addition, I suddenly realized today that I had even forgotten that Wang Pa had lost an arm. Back then, I had written it on purpose. Everyone knew that we were pursuing the aesthetics of a one-armed saber king. Alright, I don't know if I wrote anything particularly wrong in the previous chapters. In any case, I'll apologize here. Again, this time, I'll cover my face. Tang 36 did not leave with Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong. He stood in front of the Orthodox Academy's gate, watching as the dense crowd receded like a receding tide. 100 Flowers Lane quickly regained its calm. Su Moyu led the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy back. As they gazed at the ruins of the Maple Forest Pavilion, the collapsed walls, the messy forest, and the clear scars of battle, they imagined that heaven-shaking battle that had taken place not too long ago. The crowd couldn't help but feel rather strange, like they were dreaming. Of course, this was a beautiful dream, because the Orthodox Academy was currently on the Li Palace's side. Su Moyu paid no attention to the rippling emotions of the teachers and students, nor was he in a hurry to arrange for repairs. He was more concerned about something else. Is everything all right? He stared into Tang 36's eyes and asked. I saw that his eyes were very red. The he in this sentence was naturally referring to Chen Chongqing. Su Moyu was worried that his injuries were too severe. Tang 36 spread out his hands in speechlessness, thinking, do I have to tell you about Chen Chongqing and the emperor crying on each other's heads? In the quiet side hall, the water fell into the pond, making a tinkling sound. The ladle floated on the surface of the pond in a disorderly manner, like an unmanned boat in the wilderness. Wang Jitsa's gaze left the pool and looked out of the hall. The sky had not yet darkened, and in the light of the sun, the scenery was extremely clear, but he did not see Taoist Wu. There was a smear of white in the world, extremely pure and holy, like snow and also like a lotus. It was Su Yorong. She stood in front of the great hall of light, tilting her head and peering inside. She looked very cute. Linghai Jiwang and the others accompanied her, silently preparing for battle. A few years ago, such a scene had already occurred. When Chen Chongqing returned from Mount Han, heavily injured, he conversed with the Pope in that quiet hall. At that time, Su Yorong was ready to strike at any time. Today, it was clear that she was ready to strike at any time. Even if the person sitting opposite Chen Chongqing today was Wang Jitsa. In the Orthodox Academy, Chen Chongqing was on the verge of being cut down by Shang Xingzhou's sword. Su Yurong was forced to act, but she was stopped by Wang Jitsa. However, Wang Jitsa admired her response at that time. If he was not wrong, that should be the natural stream divine finger. What I admire the most is that she didn't spend all her time and energy on Big Brother's saber art. You're the same. Wang Jitsa's words were extremely sincere. This was because he knew very well how terrifying the having blade technique was. It was not only because he was Zhou Dufu's sworn brother. This was something that the entire continent knew, something that had already been recorded in the history book. Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong didn't know? Of course they knew. That year, when he and Wang Po were walking along the banks of the Luo River, he had displayed Zhou Dufu's blade intent, and Wang Po had used it to break through and kill Nantai with a single blade. Now, the having blade technique was in his and Su Yurong's hands. With the having blade technique, they could inherit Zhou Dufu's legacy and very possibly become the second strongest expert under the starry sky. If it were any other cultivator, how could they resist this temptation? They would assuredly strenuously train in that blade technique every day, spending all their time and even their entire lives on it. But Chen Chongqing did not do this, and neither did Su Yurong. Other than the time they had spent together in the mausoleum of books, they had never met up specifically to cultivate the having blade technique. They would even often forget about this matter. The having blade technique is too fierce. I feel somewhat uncomfortable. This was the explanation Chen Chongqing gave Wang Jitsa. He thought it over, then added, and we have our own Taoist technique. That's also very good. This answer was very calm, originating from self-confidence. This was what Wang Jitsa admired the most, and also what puzzled him. From the mausoleum of books to the sword pool to the garden of Zhou, he had encountered so many fortuitous encounters, but none of them had been able to change Chen Chongqing's mind. Who could treat the heavenly tome monoliths as stone pearls and casually wear them on their wrists? He and Su Yurong were so young, so just where did their self-confidence come from that allowed them to face this world so calmly and unhurriedly? This world is ours, and it is also yours, but in the end it will be yours. Wang Jitsa looked at him and said, I originally believed that you were still young, that you could wait for us to grow old, that there was no need to take such risks. Chen Chongqing understood that he was explaining why he had accepted Shang Xingzhou's invitation to appear in the capital. He didn't know what to say, because the person explaining to him was called Wang Jitsa. This fact truly was very easy to make one feel perplexed and helpless. Su Yurong turned to look at the black eaves in the depths of the hall. After confirming that the conversation in the quiet hall had gone smoothly, she naturally would not break through the stone walls and ignite her phoenix flames. Linghai Jiwang and the others also dispersed. At this moment, she heard Wang Jitsa's words. Of course, this was also because Wang Jitsa wanted her to hear them. These words caused her brows to rise like flames prepared to burn the heavens. A figure entered her line of sight. It seems that your fighting spirit has not completely disappeared. Mou smiled at her and said, It's been so many years, but you're still so warlike. Other than people like her, Prince Chen Lu, and the state of Ping, who had grown up together, very few people knew of Su Yurong's true personality. Su Yurong looked at her and said, In your eyes I also see only dissatisfaction. You and I have made countless preparations, but in the end all of them came to nothing. It's hard not to feel a little uncomfortable. As Mou spoke, she shrugged her shoulders, appearing particularly unconcerned. It was such a simple sentence, but who knew how much bloodshed was hidden behind it? If not for Chen Chongqing's seemingly naive and foolish arrangements, perhaps the capital really would have flowed with rivers of blood today. Your little man truly isn't bad. Mou sighed, but it's a pity for Lord Wang. Su Yurong jeered, Do you really think he's like in the books? Back in the imperial palace, she was still young and Mou was already a young girl. When they were studying, they had been infatuated with Wang Jitsa countless times. There were far too many young girls like this in the world. In their view, Lord Wang was assuredly living on the clouds, gathering dew for food. If they really saw him, they would know that such an exiled immortal did not exist. He was a rather pitiful, even boring old man who knew how to compromise. Just as Mou and Su Yurong were discussing Wang Jitsa, Wang Jitsa heard a sentence. This sentence was a response to his previous explanation. It was unyielding and direct. Since this world is fated to be ours, why don't you retreat? Must the young wait? If we wait too long, we will also become boring old men like you. Then won't this world always be your world? It was not Chen Chongqing, nor was it Tang 36. The speaker was Linghai Jiwang. Wang Jitsa glanced at him and recognized him as an archbishop. These so-called prefects of the orthodoxy were not even worthy of his attention. But there was one matter that, once it fell into his eyes, was hard to ignore. Ling Haijiwang was very young. Of the orthodoxy's prefects, he was the youngest. Tang 36 had once said this. Youth was justice. Wang Jitsa thought it over, then said, "That's reasonable." A carriage drove out of the Li Palace. The somewhat shabby and deformed wheels rolled over the hard stone slabs of the plaza, the sound of friction rather unpleasant to hear. The blood on the slabs had long since been washed clean. Taoist Wu's furious shouts came from the carriage. "I'll kill all of you! You bastards, you dare treat this old man like this!" No one responded to Taoist Wu's curses. There was not a single person. The plaza had been cleared out long ago. This was the Li Palace's expression of respect. Ling Haijiwang stood under the eaves, calmly gazing at the carriage as it drew further and further away. And Hua stood at his side, thinking about what she had done today. As she listened to these curses, her face paled and her expression became somewhat helpless. Taoist Wu's anger stemmed from his defeat, but it was also because he had not felt any respect in the Li Palace. Logically speaking, regardless of victory or defeat, an elder of his generation should be respected. Moreover, he represented Wang Jitsa. But he did not. From Chen Chongxing to Su Yurong, from Ling Haijiwang to Enhua, and then to Wang Po and Mou outside, none of them expressed this attitude. Perhaps this represented the end of an era. That era. Wu Daozi was very angry, or rather, very disappointed. But Wang Jitsa was very calm, and could even be said to be gratified. Because he felt a kind of power today. It was a power that he was once very familiar with, but gradually faded away after the great Zhou Empire was founded. That kind of power was a bit rough, easily displeasing. There were no rules, but there was an extremely lively life force, extremely moving. 1,000 years ago, the world was in chaos, the imperial court collapsed, and the demon race went south. The people had no way to make a living, and there were bones on the road. Then, wildflowers bloomed. Zhou Dufu, Qin Xuanba, Li Jiexing, Shang Xingzhou, King Chu, Ding Chongshan, Li Mi Qin Zhong, Yu Gong, those people in the Lingyan pavilion, and him. They were all very young at that time, but who had they ever respected? Who was he afraid of? As it turned out, that era had not ended. It was still that era. The age of youth. To be continued. Chapter 78. Wang Jitsa left the capital, not knowing when he would next come out of Sangarama Temple. Shang Xingzhou also returned to Luoyang and didn't leave the Monastery of Eternal Spring for many years. Before this, he had a conversation with Yuren in the Imperial Palace. The first thing Yuren said to him was, "When the Holy Maiden entered the palace that night, I promised her nothing." That night, Prince Chen Lu traveled through the night to Luoyang. Shang Xingzhou remained silent until today. From a certain perspective, he had fallen into Su Yurong's trap. Su Yurong was borrowing power to attack the heart. Yuren's meaning was very clear. "If you really do suspect me, you can ask me first." Shang Xingzhou did not ask. He had given Su Yurong a reason for this in the Mausoleum of Books. Luoyang did not receive a letter from the Imperial Palace. Many days had passed, enough time to write a heartfelt letter, but Yuren had not said a single word. Yuren asked, if Emperor Taizong were still alive, what would he do? Will he take the initiative to write letters? From the time Xining Village's old temple was even smaller, Shang Xingzhou had begun to teach Yuren how to become an outstanding monarch. In Shang Xingzhou's view, and it was also publicly acknowledged by the entire continent, the most outstanding sovereign in history was naturally Emperor Taizong. He hoped that Yuren would become the second Emperor Taizong, so he naturally had to learn or imitate him. This was the case every day. When faced with the most complex and difficult of choices, it was very normal for Yuren to imagine Emperor Taizong's actions. The answer was obvious. Emperor Taizong would never write a letter to Luoyang. "You did well," Shang Xingzhou said to Yuren, a gratified expression on his face. "But you haven't done enough. Emperor Taizong should be even more remorseful now, perhaps even issuing an edict of self-condemnation. The wind and snow had stopped long ago, and spring had returned to the earth. The square of the imperial palace was wet from the melting snow, and from afar, one could see the new greenery in the cracks of the stones. Yuren gazed at the figure gradually vanishing into the twilight and thought of their previous conversation. He softly said, "I am far inferior to grandfather." He was not as good as his grandfather in many ways, such as hypocrisy. For example, he had no way of resolving the issue between Shang Xingzhou and Chen Chongxing. Teacher is getting old. Yuren thought of the white hair at Shang Xingzhou's temples and felt rather downcast. Eunuch Lin looked at His Majesty's profile and suddenly felt a little sad. From the time he entered the palace during the reign of the previous emperor until now, he was already old and had seen many things. However, he was increasingly unable to understand the thoughts of the younger generation. Whether it was the young emperor or the young pope, they all deeply respected elders like Wang Jitze and Shang Xingzhou. However, they had to defeat their opponent. They had to defeat them completely. Why was that? Today, Mount Emo had collapsed. Ji Mountain became the highest peak in the suburbs of the capital. The Prince of Zhongshan gazed at the distant setting sun and narrowed his sharp eyes. As soon as the Orthodox Academy had a result, he left 100 Flowers Lane. He didn't want to kneel to Chen Chongxing, and he didn't want to stay in the capital anymore. Now that Shang Xingzhou had admitted defeat, the days of the Chen family's princes would become more and more difficult. He decided to return to his county and wait for the imperial edict. If he left without an imperial edict, he could be accused of treason by the imperial court at any time. He did not want to give a reason. The Prince of Xiang walked to the summit. As he gazed at the warm glow of twilight, he sighed. He was also waiting for an imperial decree, but the contents of this decree were different from the Prince of Zhongshan's. The Prince of Zhongshan asked, "Did you not expect the venerable Taoist to lose? I have served the venerable Taoist for 10 some years, and I truly did not expect it." The Prince of Xiang placed his hands on his belt and gasped for breath. But no matter who won or lost, it was still not a matter for the three of them. There was a faint undertone to these words. The Prince of Zhongshan sneered, "One temple in Xining rules the world. The White Emperor's words are truly correct." The Prince of Xiang sighed, "The world? I can't even figure out whose world it belongs to." The Prince of Zhongshan glanced at him and asked, "You're still not willing to admit that that person is our younger brother?" The Prince of Xiang said nothing, but his fingers sank into the fat on his waist. The Prince of Zhongshan slightly creased his brow. "Just because he was born of that woman?" The Prince of Xiang rebuked, "That's imperial mother." The Prince of Zhongshan angrily retorted, "Hypocritical to the extreme, truly boring. In this aspect, you've really learned from grandfather." The Prince of Xiang bitterly smiled. Alas, imperial father did not think this way. The Prince of Zhongshan jeered, "That was because imperial father did not like grandfather." At this moment, the imperial decree finally arrived. The Prince of Zhongshan received the decree he wanted. It was obvious that the emperor also did not want him to stay in the capital and curse every day. But the Prince of Xiang did not receive the decree he wanted. The emperor had left Prince Chen Lu in the capital, but he had naturally used a different name. The Prince of Zhongshan patted the Prince of Xiang on the shoulder and left. The Prince of Xiang stood in the twilight. After a moment of silence, he descended the mountain. By the time he returned to the relay station, everyone had already received the news. The princess had cried so hard that she almost fainted. His other sons and daughters also had tear stains on their faces, though a hint of joy would occasionally flash through their eyes. When I gave him a name, I didn't think of a good one. That leaving character is inauspicious. The Prince of Xiang sat on the palace armchair and looked at his children in the room. He spent the majority of his life in the capital as a hostage and made many contributions to our clan. I don't need all of you to be grateful, but can I trouble all of you to be a little more sincere when you play the role of grief?" Hearing these words, everyone looked at each other, perhaps out of embarrassment or nervousness. Some people actually began to cry, and then there was an endless stream of sorrowful wails. The Prince of Xiang was rather annoyed by this. Holding his belt, he walked into the rear courtyard of the relay station and boarded the royal carriage with the help of a servant girl. The carriage was covered in a thick blanket. There were delicious fruits and charming beauties. A very fat man was surrounded by delicacies and beauties. If one looked carefully, one would realize that this man was very similar to the Prince of Xiang, almost identical. The Prince of Xiang walked up to the man and sighed. "I say, you have to act a little more realistically. After all, I'm still an expert of the divine domain. I should at least have a little imposing manner, right?" The man grimaced. "Your Highness, if I could cultivate to your level, would I still need to be a substitute?" The Prince of Xiang helplessly asked. "Then what about imposing manner?" The man sternly replied, "Your Highness is just such an amiable person. To the north of the Tsong Province Army Headquarters, to the west of the Starfall Mountains, was a grassland. This grassland was the homeland of the elf race. Because of the war between the demons, demi-humans, and humans, it had long since become desolate, but it had become a paradise for monsters. Monsters rarely seen anywhere else on the continent could be seen here. Of course, this also meant danger and chaos. But several years ago, a monster brought an earth monkey to this place. He quickly became the emperor of this grassland. And then, someone else came. To be continued. Chapter 79. Students, it's not the end yet. Although the first few chapters are really well written and meaningful, there are still a lot of important parts to this story. First, we have to conquer the world in a tacky way. Then, are we not going to explore other worlds? Also, I made a mistake in yesterday's chapter. After I updated it, I was reminded by a friend and changed it. I don't know if any of you saw it. If you did, please pretend you didn't see it. This monster was Chusu. In White Emperor City, he had been forced to retreat again and again by Su Yurong. He was simply no match for her, but that was because of their mutual engendering and restraining. In truth, in the world below the divine domain, he had the ability to threaten any expert, whether it was Chun Chongsheng or Qiushan Jun. This desolate and uninhabited plain did not have any excessively ancient or powerful monsters. Even if there were some herds of beasts that were difficult to deal with, they were easily subdued by the earth monkey. After several years, he very quickly became the sovereign of this plain. Perhaps because the influence of the previous sect master's strand of soul on his body was growing weaker and weaker, or perhaps because he enjoyed the life of a sovereign, Chusu never left the plains again, much less continued to take revenge on Su Li's descendants. Occasionally, late at night, he would sit at the highest point of the meadow and look at the south in silence for a long time. It was not because he missed her. He definitely did not miss the cold and damp days at the bottom of the cliff in the longevity sect. Rather, it was because he was fighting against his instinctive desires. When he was created, his soul had been implanted with an indelible desire to kill and a bone-deep hatred for anyone related to the name Su Li. If he couldn't vent this desire and hatred through violent actions, it was very likely that he would be devoured by the Yellow Springs art. But too many elves had died on this plain, and the soil was soaked in blood. Very few people passed through. He had no one to kill, so he could only learn to endure and learn to fight against this instinctive desire. One night, he was sitting at the highest point of the meadow when he suddenly sensed something and looked up at the sky. Among the many stars in the sky, one of them became extremely bright, at least a few hundred times brighter than usual. It was very eye-catching. Chusu's face paled, and not even those black hairs could conceal it. He didn't know if it was because of the starlight or some other reason. How is this possible? As he gazed at that dazzling star, Chusu's mind was in turmoil. Another person has actually entered the divine domain. Why isn't that person me? He roared angrily and smashed his hands on the ground, sending grass and mud flying everywhere. No. Absolutely not. Chusu's unpleasant and hoarse voice echoed through the dark plains, the entire world able to sense his unwillingness and resentment. All of a sudden, he stopped shouting and sniffed around like a dog in the night air. With a rustling, the earth monkey appeared on the meadow, using its forelegs to crawl to Chusu's side. Chusu had a hunchback and a short stature. He wore a tattered black robe, and his entire body exuded a rancid odor. The more beautiful the starry sky, the uglier Chusu was, especially when his agitated waving hands were illuminated by the starlight. His hands were covered in scales and covered in black fur. His sharp claws were covered in filth and flesh that had rotted for who knew how many years. Anyone, even demonic beasts, would reveal feelings of disgust or fear when looking at such a monster. The earth monkey did not. It looked at Chusu with eyes full of confusion, trust, and worship. "There's a treasure." Chusu looked at a certain place in the darkness and spoke in a low and hoarse voice. The brightest star in the night sky represented that an expert had entered the divine domain, just like how Wang Pa had broken through by the Luo River. All things in the world would sense this, especially the laws or existences above the divine domain. Chusu could clearly sense the ripples of divine qi. He could sense it so clearly because the divine aura was in the grassland, not far away. The true body of that divine qi was probably in a state of slumber, or perhaps in a weakened state. To greedy cultivators, this was an irresistible temptation, let alone the Yellow Springs art that Chusu cultivated. Without hesitation, he burrowed into the ground, heading toward that place in the darkness. The earth monkey looked around the meadow, and let out a low whimper as a warning. Then it stood up, peed, and followed Chusu into the ground. Several dozen li away, there was a rocky mountain. It looked very ordinary on the outside, but the rocks on the inside were red. In the depths of a certain cave, the walls were painted with simple and unadorned murals from ancient times. The light was dim, and one could faintly make out a stone platform. On the stone platform was a bird's nest formed from branches and soft grass, within which lay a simple and unadorned little bird. This cave was several li deep, its structure extremely complex, and there were countless forks in the road. Not even the most formidable monster could reach the bottom. Logically speaking, the gray bird should be very safe. But even the most complex structure could not stop those creatures that could burrow into the earth. As he gazed at that unremarkable gray bird, Chusu's body began to tremble, the stench from his tattered black robe growing thicker and thicker. He did not fear a being of the divine domain, nor was he disappointed that he had found the wrong target. He was excited. He felt that his rough fate had finally come to an end. The word lucky had finally fallen on his head. When the earth monkey followed the trail Chusu had left behind and emerged from the ground, it saw this sight. When its gaze fell on that gray little bird, it instantly went blank. To put it another way, even its extremely experienced, extremely sinister, and shameless self was dumbfounded. The earth monkey recognized that gray little bird. Let alone a mere change in shape, even if it had been reduced to dust, it would still not dare to forget it. This bird was the golden-winged great pung. On the plains of the unsetting sun, countless monsters revered it. Just like the dragon race and the phoenix, the golden-winged great pung was an innately divine creature. Chusu was keenly aware of the benefits of eating a golden-winged great pung. It was obvious that this golden-winged great pung was in the midst of a long awakening and had no ability to protect itself. Chusu could not let this chance slip by. The earth monkey was also keenly aware of this, so no matter how crafty and sinister it was, it could not think of a way to stop Chusu. At this moment, the gray little bird opened its eyes. With a glance, it knew what that putrid monster wanted to do. There was no fear or pleading in the young Peng's eyes, only indifference. An indescribably terrifying pressure appeared in the cave. Do you think that I would be frightened by you? Chusu's voice was very hoarse and unpleasant to hear. The young Peng's eyes were brimming with anger. But just as Chusu thought, it was at a crucial moment in the awakening of its soul, and could not move. A howl brimming with ruthlessness and grievance resounded through the cave. You and I are the same, both proud and cold poison seeds that have never liked this world. We have no master, no friends, so naturally no one will be willing to save us. This being the case, why don't we become one and have another contest with this world? Chusu solemnly said to the young Peng. The young Peng rolled its eyes at him like he was an idiot. A streak of fire suddenly appeared in the night sky. The streak of fire pierced into the rock. The earth quaked and lava surged, its heat indescribable. The mountain collapsed, a cloud of dust rising. Chusu sensed a familiar chi and recalled the pain from several years ago, his face turning abnormally pale. A petite figure walked out of the dust, its wings slowly folding up and then vanishing. The young Peng cried out at this figure, seeming both wronged and like a child acting like a spoiled child. Su Yorong reached out and caressed it. The young Peng seemed very comfortable. With a few grunts, it closed its eyes and continued to sleep. So it was you. At this sight, Chusu sorrowfully said, all the good things in the world are yours. Is there any justice in this? Su Yorong thought this over, then said, it really does seem rather unfair. Chusu sensed her chi and suddenly began to laugh. His laughter was very unpleasant to hear, his smile even more so. So it wasn't you. To be continued. Chapter 80. So it was you was very easy to understand, but the following so it wasn't you was rather inexplicable and incomprehensible. Anyone else would probably be confused and think that Chusu was a madman, but Su Yorong understood his meaning. She gave a faint smile and said nothing. The smile on Chusu's face gradually faded as he solemnly said, the fate between us is truly not shallow. A rancid odor wafted through the ruined mountain, as nauseating as his hoarse and unpleasant voice. Chusu was a monster of the longevity sect, while Su Yorong was the holy maiden of South Stream Temple. The longevity sect and South Stream Temple had an extremely deep relationship. If one truly wanted to talk about fate and the Tao, it truly was a very long story. Su Yorong was not in the mood to listen to this story, and Chusu did not have the time. The ground trembled, the scattered red rocks bouncing about on the surface of the grassland. A dense mass of red dots of light appeared on the perimeter of the grassland, appearing like scattered specks of blood. These red dots were the eyes of the monsters. Several hundred monsters had used the cover of the darkness to surround the mountain. I can't beat you. Chusa looked at Su Yorong and shrilly said, but I have many subordinates. Are you afraid? Just as he had said to the golden-winged Great Peng, he had no teachers, relatives, fellow disciples, friends, and not even a master. He was an exclusive species, and also a poisonous species. When he came to the grassland, he suddenly had many loyal and devoted subordinates. He was very unfamiliar with this feeling, but he liked it very much. He felt like he was the emperor of the grassland, that with a wave of his hand, a magnificent army would follow. He wanted to show off to Su Yorong. The earth monkey lay at his side, its head lowered, its body trembling in fear. Chusu was very proud. Su Yorong calmly gazed at him, somewhat pitying him. Chusu was very angry, but he did not have time to order the monsters to attack. The cry of a crane resounded from the distant night sky. The monsters raised their heads in fear, as if they had been turned into statues. The golden-winged Great Peng opened its eyes and glanced at the night sky. Sensing that familiar chi, it scornfully turned its head. She's not even married yet, but you're already being ridden by him every day. Do you have no shame? In the breeze, the white crane landed in the disorderly mountains. He wore a light green Taoist robe, and his tightly bound black hair was tied into a simple ebony Taoist bun. He was no different from several years ago. Chen Chongqing was still dressed in such a simple manner that no one would associate him with the Pope. After Chen Chongqing appeared, the entire world became quiet. The demonic beasts retreated cautiously in fear, not even daring to make a sound as they rubbed against the grass. Perhaps it was because his Taoist robes had too much of the scent of black frost dragons, or perhaps it was because of the reverence of some ancient demonic beast. The root cause of the silence was Chusu's silence. He stared at Chen Chongqing's face for a long time and suddenly shouted, "It's not you either." Chen Chongqing said, "Yes, not me." Upon receiving confirmation, Chusu's mood became extremely good, and he found it hard to control his laughter. "Ha ha ha ha! It really wasn't you. I knew it couldn't be you." He pointed at Chen Chongqing's face and kept laughing and shouting until tears and snot flowed down. The reason he was so agitated, even losing his composure, was that Chusu was currently in a very complicated mood. He had noticed the changes in Chen Chongqing in the last few years. The star radiance in his 180 acupuncture points was almost non-existent, and his sword intent was barely visible under his blue Taoist robe. What did this mean? It meant that he was only half a step from the divine. For someone as young as Chen Chongqing to be so close to the divine domain, had there ever been such a person in history? Qin Xuanba? Yes, that person was not Chen Chongqing. But the current Chen Chongqing was no longer an opponent he could defeat. Chusu decided to flee. He laughed so exaggeratedly to hide his true intentions. His voice came to a screeching halt as his gray wings of flesh broke through the wind, the stench of blood wafting through the air. Chusu fled underground. Su Yorong's reaction had been a little slow, so she could not catch up, not even by igniting her phoenix fire. This was also the truth of the situation. Chusu vanished. Su Yorong did not pursue. In the darkness, the disorderly mountains and plains were pitch black. Only a very faint strand of spiritual sense drifted in the wind. Chusu had intentionally left this strand of spiritual sense for the earth monkey. He had lived with the earth monkey for the last few years and had already gotten used to its existence. He had raised it like a dog, and even at this tense moment, he did not want to abandon it. Suddenly, several li away, a mound of earth several zhang high rose from the plains. Under the starlight, the green grass was torn apart and black earth gushed out. Whoosh! A figure shot out of the mound like a pebble, and was thrown several dozen zhang into the air. After a moment, the person crashed to the ground and groaned. It was Chusu's voice. Just what had happened? Chusu was also very confused. He lowered his head in fear and alarm and saw that something had bitten off half of his left foot. Soon after, he felt a chill and pain from his back. With a slight movement of his spiritual sense, he realized that the old wound Su Yorong had left on his wings of flesh had split open again. Fear would increase the intensity of pain. Chusu felt his scalp go numb from the pain coming from two places. Unable to control himself, he began to scream. Who ambushed me?" Rustling could be heard over the darkness of the plains. It was not the wind rustling the grass, nor was it a flood serpent burrowing into the ground. It was the sound of fur rubbing against grass. The earth monkey used its forelimbs to crawl under the mound and turned its head to the side, spitting. Pot, 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 pot. The earth monkey's spit contained blood and rotten flesh. It was you. Chusu was stunned by this sight. The earth monkey's thin body seemed to transform into a devil. He could not understand why it would suddenly betray him after all these years of mutual dependence. Even if his temper was a little bad, why did it have to want him dead? The earth monkey turned its head and glanced at Chusu. Chusu felt like he could see a terrifying smile in the monster's eyes. At this moment, Chen Chongqing's voice rang out, "Enough." The earth monkey stood up and eagerly ran back to Chen Chongqing's side, then turned its head to glance at Chusu. Only now did Chusu realize that this earth monkey was not crippled. Could actually walk on 2 feet. He knew that he was raising a fake dog, But only today did he realize that everything had been fake. The mental pain of being tricked and toyed with surpassed the pain from his wounds. "You did all of this?" he angrily yelled at Chen Chongqing. "I'll kill you!" A fierce wind stirred and a foul stench soared into the sky. The grass was dyed black and the red rocks rustled to the ground. The tattered black clothes rustled in the wind. An awe-inspiring sword intent suddenly appeared, shattering the starlight. Several streams of blood shot out. To be continued. Chapter 81. Tonight, the starlight was extremely dazzling. After being sliced apart by the sword intent, it scattered in all directions, making the grassland even brighter. It was like it was daytime, illuminating everything. The blood was black, and when it fell on the grass, it hissed and stirred up a pungent mist. The grass began to visibly blacken. Howls and fierce winds howled as a terrifying qi disturbed the world. Dirt shot into the sky like a waterfall, and then it was crushed down by the awe-inspiring sword intent. After some time, it was finally quiet. Chusu stood on the spot with his head lowered. He had been born short and had a hunched back, and with his head lowered, he looked even more humble and pitiful. His black robe had become even more tattered, covered in blood and dust, and 2 large holes had appeared on the front of his body. These holes had been left by a sword, piercing through the scales and black fur covering his body and cutting open his ribs, from which blood flowed out. His gray wings of flesh weakly flapped twice, spraying out several spurts of black blood. His old wounds had been torn open. His severed shoulder was pierced by some grass, and his fake arm had been shredded by the sword qi. With him as the center, the grassland for a radius of around 20 zhang was covered in blood, and the blood was poisonous. The monsters had been caught up in the battle, but not many had died. The vast majority of the monsters had fled under the earth monkey's lead. The starlight illuminated the night sky, but not a single sword had appeared. Those swords had already returned to their sheaths. The sheaths were tied to his belt. Chen Chongqing said nothing, only looked at him. "It's all fake." Chusu raised his head and hoarsely said, "Invincibility is fake, the legacy is fake, defying the heavens to obtain the Tao is also fake, and even relying on each other for survival is fake. I only want to live, but my existence has no meaning, so even living is fake. I was born to be a tool for killing." As he spoke, he did not look at the earth monkey, nor did he look south. The longevity sect was in the south. Chen Chongqing fell quiet for a while, then said, "I was also born as a tool, but I think that since we exist, we naturally have our meaning." From a certain perspective, his background was very similar to Chusu's. Chusu shook his head. "That's because you encountered a few people who could bestow meaning to your existence." Chen Chongqing thought about it and said, "You're right." Chusu replied, "So you are luckier than me, happier than me." Chen Chongqing said, "Yes, but this cannot be a reason." "What reason?" "Naturally, it was a reason to do evil. A tragic life can be a spiritual treasure, but it can't be a debt that can be transferred to someone else. No matter how pitiful your childhood experience was, you still had to bear the responsibility when you grew up and became a homicidal maniac." Chusu had not committed any great evil in the last few years, but his hands had been stained with no small amount of blood. Chusu understood his meaning and knew that he would not be able to escape this calamity. He began to chuckle. "If you were me, would you be Chusu or Chen Chongqing?" These were his last words in this world. His body split into more than a dozen pieces, scattering on the ground like broken building blocks. Black blood splashed everywhere, and a rotten and cold aura spread in all directions. Su Yorong stretched out her hand and unleashed a stream of flames. The flame glowed with a pure and holy golden color as it burned incessantly on the surface of the earth. It even followed the cracks and burned underground. When the black blood encountered the flames, it transformed into smoke that constantly sizzled. The rotten and cold qi was gradually purified, and one could faintly make out the wails of ghosts, extremely resentful and fearful. As the golden flames dwindled, Chen Chongqing said, "Perhaps to him, this is release. If he is still unwilling to accept death, how can his soul be at peace?" Su Yorong raised her right hand and aimed it at him. There was a very small wound on his neck, and in the wound were several tiny black crystals. With his strength and Su Yorong watching from the side, he still needed to pay a price, a risk, if he wanted to completely kill a monster like Chusu. A light green light, brimming with a holy aura, emerged from Su Yorong's palm and landed on Chen Chongqing's neck. Those black crystals instantly melted like snowflakes in the blazing sun, and at the same time, the wound began to visibly heal. Su Yorong said, "Logically speaking, you shouldn't be afraid of the Yellow Springs Arts invasion, but it's still best to be careful." Chen Chongqing replied, "Thank you." Su Yorong said, "May the sacred light be with you." Chen Chongqing sincerely replied, "Then I want to always stay at your side." These were words of love. Although he was very bad at saying words of love and was too serious, making him seem rather stupid, it was all the more moving. But Su Yorong did not react, seeming rather cold. Chen Chongqing didn't understand why, and just when he wanted to ask, he was interrupted. At some point, the earth monkey had appeared in front of him. It was kneeling on the ground and kissing the ground at his feet, appearing both reverent and passionate. Chen Chongqing suddenly realized a principle. Although the earth monkey was a monster renowned for being cunning, sinister, and terrifying, it was much easier to understand what it was thinking than to understand what a girl was thinking. When I stopped you from continuing, it wasn't because I didn't trust you, nor was it because I had a grudge against you. Chen Chongqing glanced at Su Yorong and said, "It wasn't that I sympathized with him, I just felt that there was no need." Back then, he had not been too fond of Hu-32's arrangements. Chusu truly had sought death, but why did he have to die from betrayal? His words were meant for the earth monkey, but they were also an explanation for Su Yorong. He was not sure if Su Yorong's current calmness, indifference, had anything to do with this matter. The fire on the ground was gradually extinguished, but the fire in the ground was still burning. The light of the fire seeped through the cracks, looking like frozen lightning. It had a soul-stirring beauty to it. Su Yorong's gaze passed over the fire and fell into the distance. She asked, "You're sure that he will leave through here?" Chen Chongqing replied, "That year, before he left Blue Pass, he met with Chen Chou. The agreed mark was the same as this one." As a divine general of the Mount Song army that had been forcefully pushed up by the orthodoxy, the meaning behind that person's meeting with Chen Chou was naturally very clear. Su Yorong asked, "That person's temper is so terrible, so why does he trust you so much?" Chen Chongqing replied, "That year, when you were in seclusion, I met with him." Su Yorong knew of this matter, but she had not expected it to have such a large effect on that person. With a gust of wind, the white crane landed at her side. She leaned against the crane's back and closed her eyes to rest. A few days ago, she had received the news and left Holy Maiden Peak. Tonight, she had received a message from the golden-winged Great Ping's spiritual sense and rushed over. She was already very tired. Chen Chongqing had returned from an even farther place, so he was even more tired than she was, but he could not sleep. He looked at the desolate rocky mountains in the distance and waited silently. Beyond that desolate mountain was the world of the demons, who would return from that side tonight. Chusu formally bids farewell to everyone. When I first wrote this character, I wanted to write a contrasting version of Chen Chongqing, but not a contrasting version like Ning Ke and Long Qing. I wanted to highlight pure evil that did not require reason. However, I must admit that I did not write it very well. The greatest reason is that I did not have enough space to describe it in depth. I vaguely remember that in the heroic novel, there was a pure evil character that was very well written, but that required a lot of words to be spent on it. If that was the case, then our story would become unbalanced, so there truly is a dilemma. In the next book, I want to design a plot that is more convenient to display, so I will attempt this aspect. Please do not look forward to it. To be continued. Chapter 82. Some friends are very expectant, some friends are very anxious, worried that choosing the heavens will become the work of our lives, because the sacred light continent is too far, the world is too big. Ha 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 ha. I only said those words that day to comfort everyone. I really want to continue living with Chongqing in the book, but that's impossible. Choosing the heavens will end around the 5th month. The ending was decided 3 years ago when the book was first written. It's nothing new, but it's very much in line with our taste. Please do not look forward to it. Be serious. Tonight's starlight was truly very bright. Those distant Rocky Mountains looked like steamed buns made of white flour. No, those mountains were rather short, more like the white flour steamed bun's sister song made in Xining village. Chen Chongqing felt a little hungry, and then he remembered that he had been in a hurry to sleep and had not eaten for a day and night. Why was it so bright? Of course, it was because of that star. That star was dimming, but it was still many times brighter than usual. It meant that a cultivator had broken into the divine domain. Chusu was furious at this, but when he realized that this person was not Su Yorong or Chen Chongqing, he became a little happier. Just who was that person? Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong had not mentioned that person's name, but it was obvious that they knew who it was. As he gazed at the brightest star in the night sky, Chen Chongqing was rather confused and uneasy. Given that person's personality, he would rather die than ask for help, and now that he had successfully broken through, who would he be afraid of? That day, he was rafting on the Red River. He listened to the gloomy songs of the jings in the water and ate the little red fruits that Luoluo fed him. His life was very happy. Then, the white crane came, carrying a message. This message had first come from the bear tribe. A spy from the bear tribe had delivered it to a medicine merchant, who then brought it to the Mount Song Army headquarters and personally delivered it to Chen Chou. The message was a date and a line that seemed to be scribbled without any pattern. Chen Chongqing took a small piece of paper from his bosom and stacked it with the map in his sea of consciousness. If the message was correct, that person would probably appear here tonight. The grassland under the starlight was extremely quiet. The earth monkey sensed Chen Chongqing's mood and quietly lay in front of him, not making a single sound. The monsters had retreated far away, but they did not dare to leave. They nervously looked at the earth monkey, ready to receive orders at any time. It appeared that the true master of this grassland was not Chusu, but this earth monkey. As it gazed at that bright star, the earth monkey narrowed its eyes in confusion. Although it was cunning and sinister, it was not an intelligent being after all. It did not know how to cultivate, so it was naturally unable to understand this phenomenon. Suddenly, the earth monkey straightened its body and gazed at the distant mountain, wariness and unease in its eyes. In the next moment, it quickly circled behind Chen Chongqing and only revealed its head. It let out a low roar towards the night sky. Su Yorong stood up and looked in that direction, saying, "They're here." The white crane flapped its wings and flew up into the night sky, ready to provide support. The night wind suddenly picked up, whistling, and the weeds fell to the south. The surroundings were flat and there were no trees, but for some reason, there was a rustling sound. It was the sound of the wind rustling the paper. In the bright starry sky, a huge kite floated over from the northern night sky. There was a string attached to the bottom of the huge kite, which seemed to be tied to a person. The kite flew over the white rocky mountain and arrived at the grassland bathed in starlight. With a snapping sound, the thread broke. The kite floated into the sky and gradually vanished, as if it had ascended to the starry sky and could no longer be found. The ground of the grassland trembled. That person landed in front of Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong. His face was covered by a piece of white paper. As it turned out, the rustling sound had not come from the huge kite, but from the white paper. Several black holes had been dug into the white paper, making it seem very frightening. Today, the paper was covered in specks of blood, making it seem even more sinister. He carried a spear in his hand, and his posture was very casual, like he was carrying a bag or a person. But the spear was very straight, just like his person. His body stood as straight as a ramrod, as if it would never fall. Xiao Zhang, once a member of the Proclamation of Liberation, was a madman, a madman, a madman of the experts of the middle generation. Many years ago, he had been pursued by the entire Great Zhou imperial court, and after several bloody battles, he was ultimately forced into the snowy plains. After which, there was no more news of him. No one had expected that when he next appeared, he had already broken through and become an expert of the divine domain. Starlight fell on Xiao Zhang's face, reflected off the white paper, and faintly glimmered. Chen Chongqing sensed his qi and confirmed that it was him who had just broken through, making him very happy. But before he had time to say anything, Xiao Zhang extended a hand to stop him. "I'm tired. I need to rest." After saying this, Xiao Zhang fell backwards. Even at this moment, he still maintained a perfectly straight posture and smashed straight into the ground. Bits of grass and mud flew into the air. Chen Chongqing froze. This sight made him recall the many scenes from many years ago when he and Su Li were fleeing south. After a while, he came to his senses. Removing the golden needle wrapped around his finger, he stabbed it into Xiao Zhang's neck and began to diagnose. To experts of the divine domain, the effects of the sacred light technique were rather weak. Su Yorong stood on the side, her brows slightly arched in thought. It was obvious that Xiao Zhang had been heavily injured. He had probably been pursued all this way by someone. Whether he had been injured before or after breaking into the divine, it only proved that the pursuer was an incomparably powerful expert. Logically speaking, the best choice was to take Xiao Zhang and leave. Even the strongest opponent would find it very difficult to catch up to Su Yorong and the White Crane. But Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong did not do this. Perhaps it was because Xiao Zhang's injuries were too severe, or perhaps it was because they had already sensed the change in the darkness. The starlight dimmed and the darkness deepened, gloomy and cold, as if it had gained some sort of weight. The darkness gradually gathered in a certain place, overlapping, growing darker and darker until it became a true black mountain. These were three mountainous silhouettes. They appeared on the plains, separated by several hundred li, and just happened to surround them. The ground trembled as the grass struggled free of the restraints of the wind and began to dance. Gravel also danced with the grass. This was because these three mountainous black silhouettes were currently moving. In a very short time, they had arrived at a place not far in front of them. They were like true black mountains, several dozen zhang tall. High up were two torches that seemed to be blazing. These were their eyes. The earth monkey hid behind Chen Chongqing, a fearful expression on its face. Its eyes darted around, afraid but also not daring to leave. As she gazed at those mountainous black silhouettes, Su Yorong said, "When I was a child, I always believed that the 8 great mountain men were one person." The black mountain directly in front of them spoke. Its voice was a deep and droning sound, like the wind echoing through a cave. The coldness of the plains intensified and the starlight grew even dimmer. Those mountainous black silhouettes were like the true darkness. In the eyes of Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong, they felt an unimaginable pressure. The 8 great mountain men, there are naturally 8 of them. It was rumored that in the olden days, the demon race had 8 supreme experts. To the people of the various tribes of the demon race, these 8 experts were 8 unreachable mountains, so they were called the 8 great mountain men. Only today did Chen Chongqing confirm that these demon experts really did exist, and that they were true mountains. To be continued.